Okay, so Mayor, you want to kick us off then, or start this?
Thank you all for being here this morning. I know that everyone has very busy schedules. I think this strategic plan is very important. We are in overtime on working on our plan, so I'm hoping for a very fruitful, productive day, and I appreciate all of you here leaning in and looking at the task with a positive attitude. So having said that, I'll turn it over to our consultants to just give us a little bit of update on where we are, how far we need to go before we can adopt a strategic plan. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. On this rainy, where are we, Wednesday? Okay. I'm going to say we're pleased to be back here because we want to find a good conclusion to this. We want you to have a strategic plan, and we have planned time together to hopefully reach agreement. The agenda's in front of you, and I want to just say I'm going to do a little bit of an overview about strategic planning, remind you a little bit about it, why it's important, what we want to do. Then you're going to hear from Kyle May from Planning Next, and he's going to review public comments from the reaction survey that they did in relation to the strategic plan that was the draft. And then we will really discuss, there was concern about top optimisms and concerns. We will have time to discuss that, and Kyle can stay on for that, I hope. He's got a time constraint, but if we have a lot of questions, we'll involve him in that. And then we'll be able to begin discussing the results of the strategic planning questionnaire that we had council members complete. And we have taken each of the questions and your answers, and we've compiled that, and I think it'd be very helpful in moving forward. So we will end at 2 o'clock at the very latest, and maybe before then. I think there's more agreement than disagreement, and Jacqueline and I were very pleased to see that when we got the results back from the questionnaire. So I think that with some discussion, we can get there. So I want to just talk a minute about strategic planning. And the big question is, okay, why bother, right? Why did you even undertake this endeavor? And going back quite a ways, three reasons anyway, there's plenty. We could do a Jeopardy question about why do strategic planning, and you could all give answers. But first and foremost, it provides some direction to the organization. It is really helpful when everybody, and those, especially everybody in the room, understands what council's ideas are, where you want to go, and then it's up to staff to figure out how to get there with council approval. But the idea of having a common purpose is really important. It means that people will understand, and everybody in this room can help their staff understand what is important, what the priorities are, and that everybody's pulling in the same direction. And also, it is a best practice. The best municipalities in the country, cities, counties, special districts, whatever type of local government, they have strategic plans and they use them. And your staff will be able to do that for you. They can link what you have going on your agenda to one of the goals in the plan. They can show you how they're progressing. It is a really good accountability tool for yourselves as elected officials and for staff. And I just want to emphasize that, how important it is, because then you know what is expected, staff knows what's expected, and what is really going to happen in the next, this is a 5-year plan, we'll say in the next 2 years at least, there will be good direction. So, I love this quote because it's true. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And this is a way to know where you're going and to have a road and to have a path. It doesn't mean that you can't take a pit stop somewhere unexpected, or it doesn't mean that you can't examine your route. but at least you know where you're going and how you intend to get there. So I also wanted to just remind you that it's really about having, besides the strategic plan, that your management system, that all of the leaders in this room on the staff side are important because they will be fulfilling what you have set out in the strategic plan. You've got resources, and when it comes to your budget and allocating resources, that's another place where there will be decisions. And the things that you say are important as a council will then be allocated, and it will come back to you again, so that it's not like you're writing this in stone, but it will come back to you again, and you will be reminded. The strategic plan says X, and this is how we're going to get there. And so you have a lot of control even after you have the strategic plan that you agree on, and there can be modifications. The best places often revisit the plan 2 or 3 years out to say what adjustments do we need. And I think that it's important to know it's better to have a plan, even if it's not perfect, than to have no plan at all, because you've spent a lot of time, as you know, I don't have to tell you that, and money, and the community has an expectation because they have helped develop the ideas that you're going to be able to then have a vision and fulfill that vision. So that is my brief what is strategic planning and why. I think that hopefully it's just a reminder about why it's important and why you should consider this very carefully as we move ahead. Any questions about that before we get Kyle to come in?
Yeah,
Please, Marcella.
thank you. So how is the relationship between static strategic plan and a dynamic election cycle?
What is the relationship between the strategic plan and an election cycle?
Static, because this is static.
It's not static. This is
Well-
it should be living.
Well, but it's,
And-
whatever is wrote here is static for whatever time until it's changed.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is what
well,
I mean by
for
static.
now, what you agree on today, it would be theoretically there will be not theoretically. If you agree on a strategic plan today, then management partners will work with the staff to develop an implementation action plan that says how these things will be implemented.
Okay, and
If,
then you
a
have the
new-
election cycles. Every 2 years you have elections.
So, often in a local government, depending on the new council, they will revisit the strategic plan and say, look, these are the things, are these still our goals? And are these still what we want to be working on? You have many large projects and goals that will take many years. And so, sure, does a new council get to revisit it? Absolutely, if they want to. But normally, that wouldn't stop a sitting council from adopting what they think is important. So I don't agree that it's static. I agree that you would identify the goals. You've asked people in the community for their ideas. It took a long time doing that. We've got a lot of data. And so I don't see this as static. I see a strategic plan as a living document. If situations change, whatever they may be, whether it's political or something else comes up that you have to react to, then the strategic plan can absolutely change with the discussion. But I think that it should be viewed as a living document that just like, situations change. I mean, nobody saw a pandemic coming. So if you had had a strategic plan 3 years ago, you may have needed right now to be looking at it again to readjust because of the pandemic. So I think that that's reasonable to expect that a new council would re-examine and say, are these still our goals? Do we need to change anything? And I think that would be regardless if everybody was reelected and everybody sat on the same seats again in 2 or 3 years or whatever, 1 year. But that it should be viewed as not static and not written in stone. And indeed, that you get to come back and re-examine and ask the question, is this still the path that we want to be on? Other comments? Matt?
What would you say cities in the country percentage that have a strategic plan? Almost all of them?
It would be a hard question for me to answer. There's some councils that do goal setting, like on an annual basis. Some have full-blown strategic plans, like you're doing. I would say that probably 80% do some type of identifying where they want to go and what they want to do in some way, because it's so important. I mean, it really helps drive what people do.
And is strategic planning attached to accreditations such as budgets and finances and planning from different divisions?
I'm not. I know that, for example, the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, has certain. I'm going to actually ask Ryan. I'm not sure that that's a precursor to an accreditation, but it absolutely is a best practice. I know that.
I believe I'll double check with Harpreet, but I think that they've recently revised our standards for our budget document, that we need to have a strategic plan to be recognized as meeting those criteria.
Did everybody hear Ryan?
Thank you.
So I have a follow-up question on that. So this means that we are not accredited now because we don't have a strategic plan currently? We have no accreditation or no credibility on our budget since we don't have the strategic plan in place right now, if I understand correctly?
No, it's not really about accreditation. It's about being recognized as following, standard best practices in government finance. That's all.
Good morning. So my perspective is I see benefit and value from a strategic plan, and I'm hoping we make good progress and we're really productive today. My concern is that we're being too general and too high level to find consensus. I want to find consensus. I think that's crucial to find consensus, and I want to make sure, and I hope that all seven of us are working to do that. But the example I want to use is I've obviously spent a lot of time in ComDev. So community development, it's zoning related, and it's something that's very relevant and impactful to residents and their quality of life. And the problem is if we're vague in it, because we all can agree on something vague because it all means something different to us, then I personally feel that's not helpful to staff, because then that's actually not really giving a strategic plan or a strategic direction. We're instead leaving it up to their interpretation, or we're continuing the same issue that we have. And the issue that I've seen that I feel has been difficult on community development is the fact that you've got, two competing points of view, two competing priorities on what is the vision for Roswell. Do we want to see this turn into more of a very urban city with a much larger population? Do we want to keep some aspects of the current character and not add too much to strain the infrastructure, et cetera? And the problem is, I feel community development hasn't had a clear direction in which way they should go, because it's been unclear, it's not official. And so that's what I see as the risk of being so vague. If in the strategic plan it's that we want to make Roswell better, then the problem is there's potentially 7 different views of what does that mean, and therefore we haven't helped staff at all. So my hope is we can really do a better job of addressing the elephants in the room, and in doing so, that's why it's so important to me and so relevant is we saw those concerns, which I know we're going to address today. So we saw the feedback that we received from those thousands of residents and all that expensive outreach that we did. And I don't want us to be vaguely addressing it to kind of pat ourselves on the back and give a rubber stamp, but I want to make sure that we're giving clear direction to staff where they see, all right, here's the direction from council, which we know is done in a public process, which came from input from our residents, and therefore staff then knows which way they're marching. Which I actually don't know if Alpharetta or Milton have a strategic plan or not, but I can tell you I do feel they have done a better job where it's very clear that staff just understands here's the direction, the vision, the policies of council, and so again that's what I'm hoping we can get out of this, and that's the value that I see in a strategic plan done right.
They do have strategic plans, by the way. But let's do this if you don't mind, because I know Kyle has a time constraint. If we can let him do his presentation, and then we can come back and talk about some of the specifics that you're feeling that you need to do, that would be great, if everybody's okay with that. Okay, so Ben, or however we're going to do that, we're going to get Kyle on here, hopefully in a minute.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm having a little trouble hearing. I don't know if I can be heard, though, Amy.
You can be heard. Can you? It's Amy. Can you hear me?
I can when you're close to the computer, yes.
Okay. Well, we can hear you just fine. And if you're
Great.
having trouble hearing anybody's questions of you when you're done, then I'll be the interpreter.
That'd be great. That'd be great, Amy. Well, I guess I could jump right into this, Amy. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. Excellent. Will do. Good morning, everyone. Great to see you all, unfortunately, through this little box again, but great to see you all again. I hope everyone's doing well, having a great spring in Roswell. We actually just took on an intern here at the from Ohio State University who's from Roswell. So kind of crazy continuity here at Planning Next. But I'm excited to be back with you. In the last meeting, we talked about taking the work that Amy and her team had put together with you all in this draft strategic plan and turning it out, to the public in an open survey. We did that over the last several months. We got some good feedback based on that survey. And what I want to do this morning is quickly go through some of the perspective that was lent based on those findings. So first and foremost, as I hear some discussion here, just a quick reiteration of where we are in the process and my role involved with Together Roswell earlier on this, involved in bringing the community in a major way into this discussion. Over 2,000 individuals involved. You've heard a lot of these statistics from me before, but again, this is the culmination of the work between staff, the community, planning team, you all who are in the room. We shared a draft of the work that Amy and you all and Jacqueline had put together through the togetherroswell.org website, promoted that both through city resources and also through some of the engagement listservs that we built up through the work. We asked for some reactions, some priorities, and just additional general comments from the respondents as they read the plan, bits, pieces, or the full thing. Had just over 100 surveys that were returned to us. Some very thoughtful information that we got back. So from a qualitative standpoint, from some key bullets of things that really stood out to me as I read through each and every one of the comments that we received, and also reflecting back on some of the work that was done earlier to engage the public. I think that one of the things that was quite clear from the comments, is the idea of, that there is general support out there, not just for the fact that for this specific plan, but for the process that you all have funded and implemented here over the last year plus to bring the community into a discussion and turn that discussion into a product that reflects, their priorities. So there was good support, I think, overall in the comment pool that I was reading for that process and also for the product. I think that some of the discussion that you're having right there in the community, I'm in the room right now that I'm struggling a little bit to hear, but I think I was interpreting, is that there is a clear next step, to this work. And that's, I believe, the department level interpretation of what you've all done. I think within the strategic plan, as Amy well put, this is about setting broad direction, establishing continuity between election cycle, building a strong connection between department and elected. But what was clear within the comments is there's an eagerness to see that next level of interpretation. So what are the next steps here? How do we interpret the vision in terms of a department work plan or in terms of real recommendations that, again, can be pulled out in more specific planning work in the future? I think there's a clear need, and this has been part of the discussion since we began Together Roswell, to define what we can and cannot control within the confines of City Hall. So there's been a lot of discussion, I think, throughout the work on topics, again, and not topics that we as the city of Roswell can't influence and contribute to discussion on or contributed funding to, but topics that may be mega regional in scope. For instance, things around, congestion, transportation congestion, issues to do in some cases with school performance or school districts. Some of those, just the general development environment in which you all find yourselves in North Atlanta. So there's a lot of things I think within the plan. And again, this gets back in interpretation and in growing partnerships about what you can and cannot control, moving forward. And these last 2 points I think are really interrelated, but there was a lot of acknowledgement through this that the communication is really critical moving forward. So the work you've done communicating as progress is made from today to tomorrow to a year to 5 years, but every step along the way that you're really turning out the results as you go. And I think a key point here, connecting those results back to aspects of the community work we did and the strategic work as well. So whether it's about growth, movement, those things are tied really to the goals and objectives that these folks really help you set, and that there's an emphasis here on the balance. I think one of the discussions that we had, maybe not in the last work session, but in the previous one to that, is the idea that you can't do everything, I think, as a community, but you can have good balance. You can have strong prioritization of products or of projects or policies that the community truly supports, and that there's ability in this to make some strategic investments as well, physical and perhaps non-physical. We also asked, in these surveys for folks to give us just a sense of priority, right? We've got a number of goals that were out there. We wanted to get their sense of, where were some important areas for them, buckets, for them. And it shouldn't surprise you, economic vitality and sustainability, it was really right up there at the top. We had our discussions in Together Roswell. That's a pretty consistent, I think, sentiment across the board. But this idea of, sustainability, next chapter, fiscal responsibility, just economic vitality writ large, I think was really up there at the top. But, also, shouldn't be surprising. I think the idea of safety and this idea of exceptional quality of life is remember, we have about 100 respondents here. They respond to 3 of these things that they're really their top priorities within the goals. So these 3 really rose to the top, I think, within our comments. Some of these things are really, really areas that you as a community can strongly control. There may be things in this which you can also influence. And I think what's critical in here, that nothing received no votes, right? So everything was prioritized in some way. And I think what's clear in more of the qualitative side of the comments is that acknowledgement that there is a high quality of life, here in Roswell, and there's an interest in maintaining that, of course, long term. So some objective comments, remembering that we also asked the commenters to not just look at the broad strategy, the vision, and the goals, but also dive in a little bit to the more specific or tailored items underneath each of those clouds. Economic growth and development, again, came up quite a bit. And I think what we talk about here is the idea of doing business, either doing business, starting business, growing business, scaling business. Remembering that we just went through a key moment, I think, in the nation and in the region that's challenged a lot of small business. So that's really was on the mind of a lot of commenters here. I think a second point or sub point under growth and development is another topic that we've really dived into a lot in this work, is the idea of diversifying the tax base. That's a duh thing that a lot of communities are focused on. But I think what's interesting in this is the interpretation specific to Roswell. So how do we do this in a way that still supports, enhances the character of your great community moving forward? Being this destination piece, I think there's acknowledgement there that you are a regional destination and will continue to be so. But the idea of enhancing that further, really leaning into that, identity as, again, this next step, interpreting some of these key aspects of the strategic plan. Infrastructure, multimodal transportation, safety, and then last, of course, government follow through. I think the last point is not intentionally last. I think it hits last because what's critical here is that in a lot of comments, there's the idea that the strategic plan is here and that, there's an opportunity here to really work with this. And what I was hearing in some of these comments as well, when it comes to some of the previous work with the community, is that this is a process, and I think Amy alluded to this, that can be dynamic in nature, meaning that you have this vision that really is guiding the community, guiding this body forward. You've got these goals that support that, but the communication that happens with the community, the back and forth, the transparency, the follow through is really something that can be you live with moving forward, sharing, communicating. But another key word here that I think is important too is celebrating. So celebrating when there's progress, when there's success, when there's work that's been done, and it's been done because of the conversations that we had in the fall of 2019. I really think that gets at a lot of what we heard through the work. So I'll close with just some reminders of again, all the work that we've done together through this process, whether it was in person, whether it was through some of our small community meetings and mapping and getting out there with the public, all this work and working with some of the youth to understand their issues as well. There's a lot that's been worked into this, and I'm glad that we had the opportunity to pull the survey out and get that second or that third layer of feedback into the process. And with that, Amy, maybe you can help me pull some comments. I'm not able to hear too well, but try to get some comments or questions from the group.
Okay, I'm happy to do that, Kyle. I'm going to ask council members if they have questions of Kyle and any discussion. As soon as you get off, we'll have one. I can guarantee it. Well, I think that you've done a great job helping us understand the feedback, and we really appreciate it. All right, I'm going to give everybody one last chance because when Kyle gets off, we're done with Kyle for the day. Any other questions, Marcel?
Don't say that. That sounds final.
I volunteer then.
Okay, Marcelo has a question, and if you can't hear him, I'll repeat it.
So thank you for the presentation and sharing the summary of priority goals and objectives. I was reading carefully all the priority goals you mentioned in there and all the objectives that you spell in there. And I don't think that, to be frank and direct, that is pretty obvious. And I don't think anybody in the city, anybody at City Hall, and anybody in this room disagree with that. It was obvious. So I think that everybody knew about before even what. So the key here is how we execute that, how we implement that. Those goals and objectives is square one. If you don't understand that or you don't believe on that, then it's not a point. But how you execute and implement that is the key thing here. So if we don't spell in this strategic plan how we're going to execute it, how we're going to implement this clear, obvious objectives and goals, then what is the point? That is my question.
Okay,
Thanks.
So Kyle, did you hear that? Really, it's about the question. Could you hear anything? No.
I heard muffled, not much. I'm sorry.
The question that Marcelo is asking is about. He indicated that I think that because the goals are so broad that it's not a surprise that people were supportive of it. But his point is that the key is implementation, and he wonders about then how are we going to implement it? We being the council and staff, and if you have any opinions or thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I do think, and it's you're right to say they're broad, but I do also believe that through the work you all have done, you've developed a point of view here. You've gone from where we were to where we are. I think there's some point of view in these things that the next step, as I point out, within this is really that departmental interpretation of the work. And I think that's a communication piece between this body and your staff, but. Really, and I think you mentioned, I'm sorry, I have a little bit of trouble hearing on the multimodal piece, but remembering that there's a lot of interpretations of that word as well. So I think there's definitely work to be done, in taking this to a next more specific, what I would call action-oriented level, where we're identifying projects, policies, programs that really support, each of these items. But I think you've got a good set of tools to be able to continue to work with the community moving forward to understand, is this the right interpretation, of this goal. I think one of the products that you all, are left with, legacy products of doing this kind of robust engagement, it might sound goofy, but you got the emails, right? You've also got the URL. You've got all the work that we've done. I mean the royal we here in the room, to bring as many folks into this process, as possible. I think what would be a waste in this is to not use those tools moving forward. So as you point out, Councilman, moving forward, if there is that next step or that next interpretation level, involving them, in the right and scaled way, in some of that conversation moving forward. I think there's real eagerness in your community to have that next conversation, meaning to be involved in some of these more specific discussions. Again, reminding yourselves that there's certain things you can control, there's certain things you can't, as cities, but for those things that you can, as much as you can, involving, that interested community. And I don't mean just the Facebook community. I mean the broader community that was involved in Together Roswell in those discussions can only help you, I think, moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. I think we'll be talking a little bit more about this implementation as we move on today. Other questions for Kyle? Well, I think you have the rest of the day to yourself, Kyle. So thanks so much for presenting. Thanks for the work that you've done. It's been very helpful in understanding what community ideas are, and we appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Amy and Jacqueline, and thanks to all of you there in the room. I really appreciated this opportunity to get to know your community and know it quite well. And I wish you all luck here in this discussion. And Amy, I'm happy to follow up with any questions that emanate from the discussion here today. But thank you all for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Take care, Kyle.
Bye, everyone.
So I want to emphasize the point that Kyle made and the point about the implementation action plan, because that is where, so once you set these goals, once you approve the plan, then we will provide a template to your staff, and Michael will take the lead in developing the implementation action plan, which literally spells out exactly what you're talking about, what are we going to do with these broad goals, which are appropriate, and the objectives that are spelled out. How do we actually implement? And that will be literally step by step. And it will also assign staff, and it will assign it'll identify whether there's additional budget needed for something, whether they have the staff that can already do this work, or if there's additional resources in any way, shape, or form that's needed, and very specific items to be accomplished. And so if you think about it as an inverted triangle, we are going to get down to that point where you know what exactly is going to be done to achieve each objective. And I think that's the part that's missing, because of course we wouldn't do that until we know what your broad goals and objectives are. And that's the implementation action plan. And if you approve the strategic plan, whatever changes you want to make, then the next step is that we work with Michael, and he works with his team to get you an implementation action plan that gives the specifics about each of one of those objectives and what the actions are to make that happen. And we also help spread that out. It's a 5-year plan. So obviously you're not going to be able to get everything done in the first 2 years. So staff will help make that estimate and bring that back to you and say, okay, this is what we think we can do in the next 2 years. This is what we think needs to be out 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Obviously, Ryan with the budget will have a lot to say about that. Well, heck no, we can't. Might want to do this right away, but we don't have the money to do it yet. We have to do certain things to get there. Everybody plays a role. So, and you can imagine for each of these broad goals, which key staff are involved. But there's often, others, that it's a teamwork. But I believe that is a hang-up because you don't have it yet. Because we wouldn't jump in and go ahead and do that when we don't even know if we have the broad concepts right. So I could show you, I could find one that I'm guessing Jacqueline would have an example on her computer that we could share. Maybe after we take a break, she and I can find one, and we will show you the level of detail. And maybe that will make you feel better, because that's next. I promise you. You will see that, and you will have a chance to react to that. But we got to get the first part done. We got to get the broad concepts done first, and you have to have some agreement, and then we can get to the detail that I think that you're begging for, because that's where the rubber meets the road. But you don't walk before you don't run you don't run before you walk, and that's, if that analogy is apt, I think, for this. So okay, with that, I'm going to stop talking, and Jacqueline was going to talk about the top optimisms and concerns from the community summit and how they relate to the current goals, if you are okay doing that. All right, let's do that then.
Okay, good morning. Can you all hear me? Am I coming out of the speakers back there? Maybe, a little bit. It sounds fuzzy. I don't, but I know we need it for the public. So we sent out a questionnaire to you mid to late April, and it was based on comments that were received on the draft strategic plan. And what we want to start with are several questions from you all asking if the goals and the strategies met the top optimisms and concerns of the community. So we went back to the prior work, the community engagement summit that was held in November of 2019 that Kyle and Planning Next did. And out of that community summit came these 11 value statements. And we used those value statements. We did a little crosswalk that was in your questionnaire that you had. And with the exception of quality education, each of the current goals and many of the key objectives relate right back to those value statements. I will say there were no goals or objectives related to quality education, and that gets back to what the city of Roswell can control. So, yes. Oh, okay. I think that, Ben, can you make that? Thank you.
One thing that might be helpful is if you've got your computer, if you go ahead and log on to the Facebook feed, you might be able to read it easier.
There we go. Is that better? Awesome. Okay, that's what we needed. Okay, so here they all are. There were 11 of them. Quality education, protecting the unique natural assets, a nation-leading robust park system, a safe community, well-planned community spaces, supporting your cultural assets, an inclusive approach to community discussions, a strong and resilient local economy, proactive, responsive, and communicative governance and planning, great places, and then safe and efficient mobility choices. And those were the community value statements that came out of all of that community engagement with your Roswell residents and stakeholders. So then we asked the question in your questionnaire, if you felt that the goals in the current draft strategic plan addressed those 11 value statements. And of the responses we received, everyone said yes. No, that's where we were. So everyone voted yes that they to that question, and there were a couple of comments. And one is that I don't think that the goal statements nor the key objectives consistently reflected the residents' goals and concerns. And then there was another comment about the need to really address and define direct and specific actions related to a number of things: commercial development, maintenance of existing infrastructure, one-time capital projects for new infrastructure, and redevelopment projects. And that's, the specifics in that implementation action plan. And so, are there any comments about how the top optimisms and concerns relate to the current goals and key objectives in the current strategic plan? Okay. Okay, so then the next part is to actually continue with the responses to the questionnaire. The first three relate to the vision, the mission, and the values. And so one council member really suggested a great reformatting of the vision statement. We asked if there was agreement with that reformatting of the vision statement. 80% of the respondents said, yes, please use this reformatting. The statement didn't change at all, it's just how it's presented. And then the mission and the core values. A council member suggested revising the mission statement in the current strategic plan. The yellow highlighting and the bolding are those new additions, so that new mission statement would read: to provide our citizens with an exceptional quality of life by delivering responsive, high-quality service in a fiscally sound manner to ensure Roswell continues to be an evolving, family-friendly, that's a new addition, and vibrant community. The question was, do you agree with that revision to the mission statement? Every respondent said yes. Similarly, a council member suggested adding accountability to the current values in the draft strategic plan. The respondents, 75%, said yes, add accountability to the list of values in the current strategic plan. Any comments? Okay. Right now, the actual goals in the plan. The first goal statement, dynamic transportation network that optimizes mobility, is the first goal statement, the goal, and then there's a goal statement. When asking if you agree with the goal, all the respondents said yes, and all the respondents said, I agree with the goal statement, so no changes there. Okay, goals B and G, economic vitality and sustainability, and then intentional and balanced community growth. There was agreement on the goal, and there was agreement on the goal statement, and the two are lumped together out of order because there was also a suggested combining of those goals, B and G, into a new goal statement called Intentional Community Growth and Sustainable Economic Vitality. And there was a goal statement that went along with that, and it was a combination of those two goal statements from goals B and G. So it just took those two goals, created a new goal and goal statement, There was not agreement for the new combined goal, nor was there agreement for a new goal statement. Goal C, outstanding city services. There was agreement to keep the goal and to keep the goal statement without any revisions or modifications. There was one comment to delete the goal, suggestion to delete the goal, and also a comment that this is really a tactic, not a goal, as it's written. Goal D, outstanding collaboration, community engagement, and customer service. There was an agreement to keep that goal. Also, an agreement with the revised goal statement. So there was a suggestion to revise the goal statement to exclude that last sentence. There was an agreement to do that. I'm correcting myself. There was not agreement to do that. There was an agreement to keep the goal, an agreement to keep the original goal statement. So no changes to Goal D. Goal E, safe and secure community. Total agreement by the respondents on the goal as well as the goal statement without any changes. Goal F, good governance through organizational excellence. There was a revision proposed to the goal statement. The respondents agreed with keeping the goal as is, as well as the current goal statement. There was not agreement to revise the goal statement. Goal H, exceptional quality of life. Agreement to keep the goal. Agreement to keep the goal statement. And there was one comment to perhaps retitle this goal. There is a proposed new goal that relates to those top optimisms and concerns, those value statements from the Community Summit that relates to, your park system. The new goal is exceptional recreation in parks. And there is a proposed goal statement for that new goal. There was not agreement for the new goal. There was not a majority that agreed on the goal statement. Are there any comments or questions, discussion? Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
So I think you've displayed this in a helpful way. I think this is actually would be good for discussion, and I think it'd be helpful if we could actually see if we can come to agreement on each of these things in the sense of, I guess there's two things. One, coming to agreement on the actual goal, the actual words, all that stuff. But then B, I actually would love to use one as an example, one that was actually unanimous as an example, just to see the impact. Like if we could go back to A, which had 5 people all saying yes, they agreed with that language, and I actually agree with the language too, and that's why I think it's actually a great example.
Okay, Ben, the view.
So my concern that I addressed earlier is some things being vague, some things not giving clear direction. And what I remember we spent a lot of time editing this one in one of the previous sessions. And it was, I remember I felt it was very important that we were specifically adding with priority to our community, neighborhoods, and sensitivity to the environment. And basically, what I see is, and I feel all of council that supported this, which was unanimous. I believe what the priority to our community and neighborhoods meant is making sure that we're not doing a road project, we're not doing a transportation project with the goal of helping outside Roswell. We're not doing a project that's going to potentially create a cut through in our area just to help, Cherokee County or some other, or Cobb County or some other county. And so that's what I like about this. This is one where if there's a yay or nay vote, do we want to move this forward into a strategic plan that we fully support? For this one, I certainly would vote yay and add, as number 6 to yes. But I guess here's my question in the impact. And so, Mr. Ralph, this is my question for kind of the way I'm envisioning this. If this goal goes in a strategic plan and that strategic plan gets adopted by City Council, and then you have some members of RDOT that come forward recommending a project or advocating for a project that's benefiting outside of Roswell residents more than Roswell residents, then we'd be able to look and see this is directly going against council guidance in the strategic plan, and therefore on the opposite, I'd expect if your team is bringing forward a transportation project, then it'd be showing, look, this aligns with the strategic plan. This is most benefiting Roswell residents, not helping outside, not prioritizing outside Roswell residents over them. That's my understanding. So I guess I was aiming the question, Mr. Ralph, at you and your department, but perhaps this is a question for the consultants to see if my understanding is correct of what a strategic plan does.
Actually, if hopefully you've got the draft that you were responding to, but item number 9 under key objectives is prioritize the needs of residents, neighborhoods, and businesses in transportation projects. So literally, it is right here in the plan. There's no ambiguity, and your staff, who's, besides listening today, it's here. So a lot of times, and I'm not going to tell staff what to do, but a lot of times as items come before council, they actually relate to an item in the strategic plan. So you might see a staff report that Mohammed or his team gives you with that example, and it would say, recommend or not, or do not, based on item number, key objective 9 of the goal of this transportation. I mean, it would literally get you to a place where you understand, hey, this was our priority, we're recommending it because it's a priority and it fits in the strategic plan, or no, we don't recommend it because it doesn't fit in the strategic plan. So it's a perfect example of how your plan will help with that kind of a situation. And those are the kinds of things where if you need to fine tune, this is a good time to do that because you already identified how important that was. So yeah, absolutely. Please, Mayor.
On the flip side of what Councilmember Palermo just said, I would use the example of transit. So MARTA definitely improves the entire region, but how much does it improve Roswell? So it's a call that we have to make. So if we feel as though MARTA, a transit station, bus rapid transit in Roswell, if we feel that that's beneficial to Roswell residents, that's something we would move forward on. But if we just look at it as a regional project and say no, that's doing us a disservice. So what I'm trying to say is there will always be a gray area because you can argue whether or not MARTA really helps the city of Roswell or it actually helps the region. And so we're just getting into that gray area. So I just think that that's something we're going to have to deal with in general.
Eventually you will, yes. As things come before you and you're making, okay, so I see 3 hands. I'm going to go Christine, then Matt, and Matt. So go ahead, Christine.
Thank you, Amy. And just following up on Mayor Henry's comments, it is potentially very subjective, and we have to have a higher up vision as part of the strategic plan what the interpretation is of benefiting Roswell residents, because transportation, their job is to move traffic, and they're basically, I can see, and I don't blame them for them, this is their job, you know what, we're going to make all these cut-throughs because we're going to move Cobb County and Cherokee County through faster so that our Roswell residents can have less traffic and be able to get to the stores. So, how do we address that as part of the strategic plan? That, in my opinion, would not. My opinion would say that would not benefit Roswell residents, but somebody else may counter that. How do we address that? Just that's like the MARTA question.
So I don't think we're going to answer that question today. I don't think that question can be answered. I think that question's going to change depending on who's on council, the politics of the day, what the project is, where it's going. There's so many different variables in the process in that question to answer. So if we get stuck on that question and answering a big question like that, we all might as well just go home right now.
It's also important, I think, to recognize that we're part of a region. But more importantly, let me just point out something that makes it a little bit more difficult. 1/3 of our revenues in the city of Roswell come from sales tax. Now, the way that sales tax works is you take all the sales tax collected by Fulton County, the entire county, and you divide it up by population. And so, to a great extent, what benefits us all benefits all the citizens of Roswell. If you close the borders of Roswell because you don't want anybody coming through Roswell, I can guarantee you that that's going to affect our businesses, because I don't know if they could survive with just the residents of Roswell. So it's we are part of a region. Our financial base is significantly dependent upon all of that, and the concept of we can close our borders and just be Roswell has a lot of issues that go with it. And I think for those who believe that, that's great, but I think the public would need to understand that that has some pretty significant unintended consequences. So just to point out that we're part of a region, and our bottom line, or our revenue stream is significantly impacted by being part of that region.
So thank you all for your comments. I do want to say again that the idea of the strategic plan is not to address every specific that's going to come your way. Those eventually you will confront those questions and you'll have to make decisions. But the broad goal that you've stated, and that had a lot of support, as you could see. I mean, 5 people answered, 5 people said yes. That broad goal was well supported. And as specific projects come to you, you'll be able to decide whether or not it's what you want to then invest in or be a part of or not.
Thank you. So, and this is actually a very helpful discussion. The irony is, when I asked my question, it was actually full of optimism, thinking that for the first time, I'm actually seeing benefit and value in doing this. And now, after the discussion, I'm actually thinking this is frankly a big expenditure that's going to do the opposite intent, and something that I think is potentially a big waste. And basically the issue is that the benefit I saw was right here. We agreed that, and with number 9, that it should be priority to our community and neighborhoods, as well as sensitive to the environment. And so the benefit I saw was, and Mr. Ralph, I'm only picking on transportation because I love this goal. So again, I could be picking on every department, the same way. But so if transportation comes to us with something that does not prioritize our neighborhoods and our community, and instead prioritizes a neighboring county to increase the flow of cut-through traffic, then basically there'd be accountability saying, department director, why is it that your department is bringing forward a recommendation and the expenditure of funds on something that conflicts with our strategic plan? But my expectation is, so therefore the benefit of this, I expect that Mr. Ralph is going to see, all right, here's what council said. We need to make sure we're prioritizing our neighborhoods, we got to follow the strategic plan, and therefore Mr. Ralph makes sure the entire RDOT department knows that we need to make sure we're prioritizing, and that's what I thought this was. But from the sounds of it, I understand council can always override. I think Mayor Henry brought up a great example. MARTA, that's not going to be an RDOT decision. That's going to be a mayor and council decision. But when it's them coming forward with projects, I want to make sure there's the priority. And of course, you can think I'm digging too deep into this one. I'm using this one as a framework for my thought process for all of them. What I want is a benefit knowing that a department's going to see this, and that's what they're going to prioritize. And if they're doing the opposite, then we have an issue. But if I'm hearing that actually it doesn't matter if they listen to this or not, and everything's still just going to go to mayor and council, there's going to continue to be the uncertainty, that's where I feel, why are we doing a strategic plan?
Okay, hold on, Dan. I'm going to let Marie go first, and then it'll be your turn.
You know, I mean, I'll be really quick, but I think that's the challenge, is finding that balance and what is good for Roswell as being part of the region, and what is, you know, and how can we make being a part of a region good for our community? And I think it's a tough balance, and that's why we're here, and that's why we have the professional staff on board to help us with that. And we all come from different viewpoints, but I think ultimately, you know, we agree. This is the goal, and the goal is finding that balance that balances what's right for the community and the city, you know, with participating in the region. So to me, it all works together, and that's our challenge.
Okay, thank you so much. Dan, then Matt T.
Thank you. There's a lot of things that I'd like to say, but I'm going to try to keep this very brief. I think you hit on a great example of why the strategic plan is so important to us as a city, and particularly, I'm speaking for staff. The lack of a strategic plan, in my opinion, represents a risk and waste of taxpayer and ratepayer dollars. And it does that because there's 600 people that work here, and we all try to communicate what's important. And I think a strategic plan gives them a head start on trying to understand citizen and public opinion and elected official opinion. And I think that's a tremendous advantage to us as we all have our departments and try to prepare some sort of plan that implements that strategic vision. Some of those are required by regulatory agencies. Some of them are required by eligibility for federal funding. Some of them are just best practices and strongly encouraged by rating agencies, and those are our departmental plans. We're going to do those with or without this higher level guidance and vision. But this whole process has been extremely helpful, and I wouldn't underestimate how significant it is to have a 15 or 20 page document that every employee can read, understand, and see even our priority goals ranked. I think that's a tremendous plus for the city, and I would just hope that we get through this process and can implement it.
Thanks, Dan. Matt T.
Thank you. I'm getting really confused here. I've now heard two council members basically suggest that we close our borders, and I just want to point out that Roswell is at the confluence of 4 state roads, and those state roads belong to all the citizens of Georgia. And without those state roads, the citizens of Roswell wouldn't be able to get from here to there. And so the concept of closing our borders and not wanting people from other places to come through is just, it's not possible. It's not possible, and people need to understand that. You know, our businesses, our very livelihood depends on people being able to get around, and those 4 roads belong to the state, and the state's going to do it with those roads, you know, as we all put in our input. But I think it's very important to understand that closing our borders is not something that's possible here.
I'd like to get back to the topic at hand. I think we could debate this all day long. And I think really I would like to commend Dan Skalski for his comments, because He is just spot on how he is looking at this from a staff perspective. I think that electeds look at it from a different perspective than staff does, and I think we all recognize that. You know, we're elected by the citizens of Roswell, and we all have our perception of who elected us, why they elected us, and we will move in that direction. So, you know, we could debate the transportation, any of these all day long, but I think that we need to go back to what you had said before, is we can't drill down into the specifics until we can agree on these goal statements in general. So for me, while I don't want to increase cut-through traffic, I do want to increase mobility in Roswell. If it has a positive regional impact, so be it, that's great. But my number one concern is the city of Roswell. And as I go into meetings with, whether it's Fulton County, the state, other mayors, my number one priority is Roswell, and it always will be. However, it is very important that I can have the communication with the regional leaders on what they think is important, and there might be common ground on those. So I'm trying to get back to the big picture, which is, do we agree with this goal or not? And I agree with the goal.
Excellent. So I am. Well, I think this discussion right here, I think, decides whether it's even worth discussing strategic plan or not. First of all, I agree with all Mayor Henry's comments. I agree with her sentiment, and for her reasons, I agree with this goal. But I think we're having some serious disagreement with, which I think is going to give continued confusion to staff. So we had a council member put words in my mouth saying I want to close the borders, when what I'm saying is I want to see this be followed, which is we prioritize Roswell neighborhoods, Roswell residents, our community, and that's the priority. Our priority is not cut through traffic. And it sounds like the mayor agrees with that position. Sounds like another council member disagrees with that position. But if that's the case, then what we end up having is we have RDOT staff saying technically we have a goal here that says priority to this, but then we have other council members saying that actually we need more cut through traffic. And that's my issue that we need to be addressing with the strategic plan.
Okay, I'm going to ask, I feel like Matt needs to answer, but I would like to go with the big picture here about, and later, I mean, eventually you will get into discussions about what these mean, but we're not going to resolve every issue that every person has with the strategic plan at this point. As things come up, you will have an opportunity to hear from staff, to debate it yourself, and to understand, and then to get into the detail. And so I would love to be able to close the discussion down about every nit and word, and go with the broad concept so that we can get to agreement, because I promised we would be done by 2. And at this rate, we could be here for days. So I'm going to give you the last comment, Matt.
Right. I just want to make sure that, that the words that were just put into my mouth were not the actual words that I meant. Of course, I prioritize Roswell first. It's my home. It's the place I love. And I reject the fact that someone thinks otherwise. My point is that we can't deny that we're part of the region, and our businesses require us to be able to do that. And so we have to recognize who we are and where we are as we plan our future and we plan what goes forward. And those things can't just be thrown out and denied. And it's very important that we recognize the whole thing and prioritize. Of course, we prioritize our residents and who we are first. But that does have some connections to the rest of the world. That's the point I'm trying to make.
All right, well, thank you. So what I would like to do is I would like to actually ask the question in general. Can we go forward and get agreement on the pieces that you want in a strategic plan? Is that the direction that you want to head in? because I think it's important. Otherwise, we are just going to waste our time. And I know that everybody's got a lot of other things they could be doing. But what I'd like to do is be able to get consensus on the broad goals, the key objectives, so that at the end, by 2 o'clock, that we Management Partners has direction. We can revise the things that you want to have revised, and then go forward with a document that you're going to accept. So before we even continue discussing this, I think that the discussions are helpful, but can you all say yes? That's where we want to be at 2 o'clock. Is that okay? Does anybody not? Let me do it the other way. Does anybody feel like this is going to be a waste of time and we ought to just stop right now? Yes. You don't feel like it's a good use of your time? Because you don't feel like you could agree, or can you say?
Clearly, I'm focused on the execution and implementation of these obvious goals, objectives, and values that we've been discussing for 4 work sessions. That is my view. You might agree or might not disagree, but that is my view.
So in order to get to the execution, though, you have to agree on the key elements of it. So I guess
said the goals, objective, and values discussed on 4 work sessions, that they are so obvious for everybody in the city of Roswell, everybody sitting in this room, and everybody at City Hall. Then, I wish we spent 4 sessions discussing implementation and execution of obvious goals, objectives, and values.
that sounded more positive to me than what is a negative, because until you agree, and we have not had agreement. I mean, I was on the Zoom meeting where you didn't want to agree on it. We can't go forward with implementation until we know. So
again, the goals spelled here today, objective and values, are so obvious that, I don't think that 4 work sessions deserve, instead of working on implementation and execution, future execution of these obvious goals, objective, and values.
Mike?
So I agree. I think a lot of this, I agree with one aspect, which is a lot of this should be obvious, but nonetheless, I think actually what I like is one of the revisions mentioned accountability. And I actually see this as the opportunity to increase accountability. And again, just since we're on goal A, my example is if RDOT comes forward with something that's prioritizing cut-through traffic over Roswell residents, there's now, I think, increased accountability where residents or mayor and council can say this wasn't followed. And so for that reason, I share your goal that I would like to have something that we agree upon at 2 p.m. And right now I'll state for this one that if this is in the strategic plan as written, this is certainly something that I will support and proudly support. I can't say that for some upcoming ones, but for this one I'd love to see that in there and think it's right.
Thank you. Marie, your microphone's on. Did you want to say something? No. Okay.
Is it on?
Matt J.
So, to that point, I think we need to understand that it's not what one council member or 2 council members or 3 council members interpret the strategic plan as. It's what the majority of the council interprets the strategic plan at the time. Which hopefully the whole council will look at the strategic plan when it's done and interpret it in the way. Because if we have, here's the problem, if we have 3 council members that interpret it one way, and we have 4 council members that interpret it the other way, or we have 5 council members and 2 council members, or 6 and 1, whatever, we've got a problem, because then we have somebody saying you're not following the strategic plan. Well, what happened? So when we leave here, it's not individually what we interpret this plan as for staff. It's what the council decides as a whole through their votes in the direction of the city. So that's how the strategic plan will work moving forward. And some people might disagree with that. But if the plan is a whole and it's the policy of the city via the council, then then the council should say, all right, they're following the strategic plan. What I'm worried about hearing these comments is one individual or two individuals or three individuals might disagree and say, nope, that project's cut through project, or no, that project's not following the strategic plan, or no, that project's not that. Well, what we've done a bad job here with as of late is once a policy is passed by council, it's now the policy of the city, and we've got to move on to other business of the city. So I want to pass a strategic plan that gives us guidance to where we want to go, and then the majority of the council will set that as a representative democracy, will set the goals based upon the strategic plan to move forward. But we can't get caught up in, well, you know, the semantics of what we're doing here, because if we do, again, the strategic plan for staff will be worthless because it will be handcuffs. They'll sit here like this, you know, well, what do they really mean? So if we're going to come to agreement, which I hope we will after how many sessions and how much time we've all put in this and the community's put into it and the money we've put into it, then we need to make sure that we understand, hey, look, some of this we're not going to agree with, but working together as a council and as a city and with staff, we will make sure it's where we need to go in that direction, and we can't use it on individual small things to make political points. So I am 100% ready to pass this and get it through today at 2 o'clock and then to a council meeting. But I just want to make sure that we as a council understand that this is for the good of all the people, taking all the input of all the people that participated, staff, council, all the time we've put into this, and to throw this away because we don't agree philosophically with a couple things is a waste of taxpayer money and dangerous.
First, I'd like to say that this fourth work session was not a part of the plan. We are here in this fourth work session because there were strong objections to adopting this broad range strategic plan. As you said, this is phase one. This is not the end document. This is not what we need to do in order to get to the meat of the matter and give staff direction. We need to pass this in order to focus ourselves on the strategic plan and what it looks like. So Councilmember Zapata, basically, I don't want to put words in your mouth, said, you know, you'd have to be a moron not to agree with this. Well, you know, he's right. We do agree with this. We're in Roswell. It is clear to all of us what is important in the city of Roswell. We're not sitting here discussing whether or not we want to have train hubs here in Roswell. That's not a factor for us. That's not a part of our strategic plan. We're not sitting here talking about, you know, we need more big boxes in Roswell. It needs to be a part of our strategic plan. We're not talking about those things for a reason. We live in Roswell. We know what's important to us. Most of us moved here for the same reasons, and that's what keeps us here. So I think that Councilmember Zapata is correct. This is the first step in this process. And to insinuate that we've done this in 4 work sessions, the reason why we're in this 4th work session is there was strong objection to adopting this. Now, I also will say, through the process that most of us participated in, it was looking at, because some of the objections I heard were that we shouldn't use letters, we should use numbers, we shouldn't do this, we should do that, and which gives us an opportunity to fine-tune the way this document looks on first blush. But we'll never get to second blush if we don't adopt the first one. So what I'd like to ask council to do is adopt the document. It's very clear through your presentation that this is not the end of this. We can get to the meat of the matter, but you all and staff needs to know where we're going, and then we will continue to discuss in more detail.
So I suggest that we take a break and everybody adjust your fluid levels and do what you need to do and take some deep breaths. And let's come back in 10 minutes and reconvene. And if with your permission, I'd like to just keep going as quickly as we can, talking about the broad concepts of each of these, because we have not gotten to the point where I know people want to prioritize. I think that was a yes, and that you don't want the letters designated that way. And so I think that once we get through the broad concepts, we can try to nail this down. In the meantime, at the risk, what worries me, I could bring up an example of an implementation action plan, but what worries me is that, no, don't do it, Dan's saying no. You know what, I'm going to bring up a template. I'm not going to bring up something that's filled out. I'm going to bring up the template so you can see the level of detail that eventually you're going to be able to then, have your staff bring things forward to you. But I think that might help ease some people's fears. But if that's okay, let's take 10 minutes and come back, and then we'll keep going. Is that all right? Okay. All right, let's get back together. Sorry about that. 10 minutes stretched. All right. You're going to do this part? Okay. Sorry about that. We were having all kinds of technical difficulties. So we're going to keep going. As soon as Jacqueline gets her screen ready, we need to talk about B and G. You can see, and Marie had asked that the slides go, I think you might, Karen, were you able to get slides and distribute? Because she found it hard to see the screen. So you may be getting your these slides. In any event, Jacqueline's going to help us figure out B
and G.
G.
Right. Okay, so I think we're ready to resume. Two goals here, economic vitality and sustainability, as well as intentional and balanced community growth. So two separate goals. There was agreement to keep both of the goals. And we have them ordered this way because in terms of the flow of the questionnaire, we wanted to be able to show these two together with regards to the suggested combined goal, but there wasn't support for that. Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
Excellent. So I'd say, I'm on the fence and indifferent on if they were combined or remained separate. My comments are, and I don't know if we save this for when we get into concerns, but I do feel we need a little more discussion on G. So, but I think it really ties into what citizen concerns were. So I can probably save it for then. But I think certainly B and G, whether combined or separate, are two very, and I think separate probably makes more sense, but two very important goals for the city and for our residents and businesses.
Okay. Other comments? Goals B and G. Is there a consensus? Mayor, did you want to make a comment? I saw you pull down your mask. Just breathing, right?
Just trying to breathe.
Yes.
I support them separately.
Okay. Great. I see
I don't
it.
have a problem with it.
Councilmember Tizer. Okay. Shaking his head. Yes.
I prefer to have them combined, but I'm okay with them separate. I just think there was a lot of distraction by having so many things, so many separate goals when a lot of them spoke to the same thing.
Okay. But you support having them? Yes. Great. Okay. I think we have, I'm going to consider that consensus. Yes.
But again, clarifying that, so I do not support G as it is, but I think it would be a more productive discussion. Because I think G is crucial. I think it represents some of the largest concerns from residents. And I think, if anything, represents one of the biggest division items among our council and our community, which, again, going back to Alpharetta and Milton examples, where they've done a great job of really finding unity and having great strategies. And so so basically, the two things I'm going to look for later are, one, I actually think instead of the word growth, it should be redevelopment, because I actually had some residents bring up in the last week, they saw growth as population growth, which thought they meant it was really changing Roswell. But I think we do all agree we want balanced, intentional and balanced community redevelopment. Which at times can certainly include growth, at other times it's just improvement of different buildings or areas. And then the other aspect is the fact that we had concerns that I felt weren't really addressed in the strategic plan, and it seemed to me that this is where it could be addressed. So that's why I want to come back to it once we go through the concerns. But fully agree with B, and then G, I think we're close but not there.
Okay. How do you all feel about redevelopment? Councilmember Tizer.
And I think what Councilmember Palermo just said is really important. These are both such big things. That's why I'd see them as, I prefer them to have them separate. Do they interact with each other? Sure. But I think having them separate recognizes how big each one is. As far as your question on redevelopment versus growth, I guess, for me, the compromise, to that might be to have both words in the statement somehow, because both things are out there. Just a thought on that.
Other thoughts on goal G? Intentional and balanced community redevelopment, intentional and balanced community growth and redevelopment.
For me, it's both. And again, I think, Councilman Tizer brings up healthy discussion, but because I think, our positions might stay the same or change once we go through the concerns, I'd rather just table G and decide if we think it should be both, should it just be one, and what do we need to add in to the goals.
Okay. Okay, I think we can move forward. Thank you, Amy. Okay. Goal C, outstanding city services. There was agreement to keep the goal and the goal statement. There was a concern that this, however, is more of a tactic, more appropriate as a tactic than a goal. Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
So I lean towards agreeing with the person that wanted to delete this and felt it was a tactic, because I guess it kind of goes to Councilman Zapata's comments earlier, is, some of them are obvious, but I feel like still needs to be clear for accountability. This one, it's just so obvious. Do we really need an extra goal? I mean, of course, I would hope that every city hall all over the country knows that they should be doing this.
Yes, Councilmember Tyson.
Here's why I think it's important. It helps prioritize investments. So if it stands up as a goal that puts it at the top of the pyramid of importance, and it says, okay, here's an item in the future that comes up, it doesn't necessarily help transportation, or it doesn't necessarily help growth and development, but it really delivers better city services. Right. Okay, now I can say, yes, that's one of the top, that fits into the highest part of our pyramid of operations. It's a goal. And so now I understand how to prioritize that, as would staff. So that would be my reason for thinking it's important enough to be a goal.
It's explicit, and you make it explicit through stating it as a goal. Yes, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you. So, yeah, outstanding city service is quite a given, obvious goal and objective for anybody at City Hall. I can bet you that if I get all 600 employees together and I ask who is against outstanding city services, you won't have one hand up. So, again, it's obvious. If we need to state obvious thing in this document, that's fine, but, it is obvious. And again, nobody in this room, nobody at City Hall is against outstanding city services.
It's a given. Mayor.
I think it's important for us to reiterate what our goals are to the public. I don't know if anyone here on council has ever lived in a community where city services were not ranked highly. I don't know if you all have been on council when we've gotten an outpouring of people's garbage not being picked up. Or, for example, Fulton County, the biggest complaint we've got about people in the city of Roswell that have Fulton County water is the lack of delivery. So it's obvious to me that Fulton County, this is not a priority, outstanding services. And I think it's important for us to reiterate that that is important to our citizens. I can tell you there are a lot of citizens out there that know when their garbage pickup is 10 minutes late. And it's very important to them. There are also a lot of citizens out there that can't take their garbage to the street. And it's very important to them that we provide the service that will pick it up in their garage. So if we don't reiterate or let people know, yes, this is important to us in the city of Roswell, I think that we're just leaving gaps in this because it sends a message, well, it's not so important to us because we don't have it as a part of our strategic plan. So I support it being there.
Yes. Councilmember.
Yes, I just to add to that a little bit. I mean, I agree. It is what the community expects from the city first and foremost, and I think by having it as a goal says to the employees that this is a priority for you from the community and the elected officials, and it also helps the elected officials prioritize their investments in public in the employees in terms of education and training and retention and development and that sort of thing. So that we can keep up public safety, picking up trash,
Sure.
Mowing the lawn, mowing the grass, taking care of the parks.
Thank you. Councilmember Judy and then Palermo.
I think there's no harm in leaving it in. I think it should be in there, actually. I think it would go to budget goals as well. Obviously, when we want our city staff to perform at a high level, we treat them with a high level of respect, and they, in turn, create the highest level of service for our citizens in the community. So I believe that this is very important to have in there, and there's really no harm in keeping it in the strategic plan because it just reiterates our want and need for high-level city services.
Councilmember Palermo.
I do prefer it being out because it's so obvious. That being said, it's not doing harm. I don't see it detrimental to it. So even though it's not my preference or my ideal, I certainly don't have issues with the overall plan for this being in there. So just wanted to share that.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I don't have an issue with leaving it in there. My concern was that when we, in the last session, when we took a step back and looked at the minutia we had been in, this was the largest focused item. And that's where I had a concern, because as you look at the priority goals that you produced, it's 7%. I mean, it's in the bottom 3 as far as residents. So it's a given. I mean, we believe in our staff. I mean, our staff does wonderful things, but this is a strategic plan for the residents, and I just don't want to lose focus on that by getting mired in outstanding city services. That's my concern.
Okay. Councilmember Palermo, do you have additional comments?
No, just that I'm fine
Councilmember
with it.
Zapata.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, it's so obvious that maybe, like I've been saying, all these goals, objectives are so obvious that I'm more focused on the future implementation and execution. Maybe I have a suggestion for, since we are HR department, to bring back those from the 80s, these very inspirational posters that everybody has on the 80s there, sailing, take you, whatever. So maybe these inspiration posters can have every department regarding outstanding city services. It's a suggestion on term of implementation and execution of outstanding city services.
Yes,
Let
Mayor.
me just clarify. Were you just making fun of staff?
I said I'm more worried about implementation and execution than discussing obvious goals. And I say one suggestion that I have, so every department understand outstanding city services, that you can have posters there implying, when they walk into the office, they remember
We're
every
not
day
at
about the outstanding
implementation
city
yet.
services.
We're not at that point of the discussion yet.
Okay, thanks.
So I believe that there is consensus to keep this as a goal. So I think we can move forward. Goal D, outstanding collaboration, community engagement, and customer service. There was agreement for the goal, and there was agreement for the goal statement, the current goal statement, which would include keeping that last sentence, conduct communication and collaboration based on adopted policies and best practices. Councilmember Palermo.
So, I mean, again, going back to the discussion of something so obvious. So I like the overall goal. That last sentence is, I feel like we could be having that on every single goal could have the last sentence, make sure to do it based on adopted policies and best practices. I mean, that literally should be every single page of the strategic plan, unless we all agree that we don't have to add it to every single page, because it's such a given. So in other words, I like the revised one, in case that wasn't clear.
Could you help me understand what the sentence means?
Conduct communication. That's a good question. I'll take a stab at it.
I'm glad it wasn't a stupid question, because as I'm reading the sentence, I just want to make sure I understand what it means.
Sure.
I would say it's kind of redundant to what the first part of the statement says, so I would be comfortable with removing it as well.
Other thoughts about that last sentence?
So now I'm confused, because originally 3 people said no, they didn't like the revised goal statement, but now it's sounding more like you do.
So I was one of them that wanted to leave it in, and I just, as I'm reading it now, I just like to understand it better in case I want to change my view of it. I'm not completely sure it's a complete sentence. That's the other part of it. Conduct communication and collaboration based on adopted policies and best practices. And that followed the first part of the statement. So are we indicating here that we should continuously review what we've done in the first part of the sentence? If that's the case, I think continuous improvement is important, and I would leave it in. That's the only question I have. I'm fine leaving it in. I don't think it hurts anything.
But you're asking the question of what it means, and if you're asking the question of what it means, and you all are the ones that have identified it, then my view would be, okay, let's either clarify the wording so anybody can understand it, or remove it. And I mean, I realize it's not our plan, so it doesn't matter if you all agree, but raising the question about what something means says to me it shouldn't just stand the way it is because there's lack of inertia to change it.
Councilmember Palermo. Sorry.
Councilman Tizer, you want to finish your thoughts?
Yeah, maybe just a single word addition of at the beginning of that second of that sentence. It says continuously, right? And that goes to some of the other comments I've heard today that things might change. And so, if this is about community engagement and customer service, and you should be continuously reviewing that, then I think that might help. That might help clarify that sentence a little bit.
I think we'd have to change the whole sentence because what you're describing, I believe, is a different intent and different meaning than what's there. Right there, the verb is conduct. So it's conduct communication and conduct collaboration based on on adopted policies and best practices. And so therefore, here's an example of how I interpret this is let's go through our native plants discussion. What we've discussed with Mr. Leatherman is that if at any point for any project they're not going to say do 50%, they're going to communicate it to council, or they're going to have their process. It's whatever it might be. And so therefore, by saying conduct communication and collaboration based on adopted policies. So we have a policy. Mr. Leatherman's department's going to follow it. But again, my point is it's so obvious that. And so important that it shouldn't be on there, because my expectation is of course we should always be following adopted policies and we should always be following best practices. And if that's not, if staff feels we should be saying that more, we should certainly add it to every single goal. But again, that's where, and if what you're saying is we should consistently review it, I think actually bigger than just consistently reviewing this is the fact that we could always put in the whole strategic plan that we should consistently review it. But again, I see those as two separate verbs, two separate actions.
I think I understand.
Tizer.
I think I understand it better now after the discussion. I just leave it there.
Council members, Wellesley, did you have your hand up?
Well, I did. I mean, again, I think that the conduct communication and collaboration are incorporated in the first part of the sentence where it says promote outstanding collaboration and then in communication at all levels. If there's anything that you wanted to add, I would maybe combine the two and say in an open and consistent manner based on adopted policies and best practices. But I really don't think that's necessary because that should be a given. So I agree. I think that we could just eliminate that sentence and it would be much more clear.
Okay. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you. So, what is the understanding of the definition of community partners versus just community, resident, taxpayers, people of Roswell? What's the difference between community partners and the general public or the general community?
Someone want to address that question? Is a community partner different than the community? Yes, Councilmember Tizer.
Yeah, I think community partners would include things like our business owners, our employers, things like that. And so I think that was the intent of it saying community partners versus just the word residents, because you may be conducting engagement and customer service with them.
And community itself doesn't include everybody. Community itself, the word community doesn't include residents, taxpayers, and people of Roswell. Just community. I'm just asking that. It's a semantic question, probably. But
I think it gets back to communication at all levels and trying to segment and define what that means. So I think I heard some consensus about getting rid of the last sentence. I think that's where that's the score I have. Is that okay? Yeah, I think so.
I'm good with that. What was the recommendation, Councilmember Wilsey, that you had on adding a couple of words to the first sentence?
Oh, your mic's not on. There we go.
I guess my suggestion is community partners in an open and consistent manner based on adopted policies and best practices. Just combine those two.
Sure.
I'm good with that.
The combining of those sentences. Okay. All right. Yeah, based on. Okay, Amy's got it. In an open and consistent manner. Yeah, we are. They are. Okay, going to move ahead. Is there consensus for this? Thumbs up, heads nodding. Okay. Goal E is safe and secure community. This is really decisive. Keep the goal and keep the goal statement as is. I think because there are no comments, I'm going to take that as consensus. Oh, Councilmember Zapata.
So, safe and secure community. So, I see here only police and fire. What about, for example, I'm not picking on them, but public safety, with public works, with the water, for example, is not a safe and secure, it's not part of the safe and secure community providing, safe water, or transportation, having safe roads and secure roads in the city. So is any desire to expand to, other departments than obvious police and fire too, to include for secure and safe community?
So you'd like to expand the goal statement to include.
Right, it's a suggestion, but that's fine.
I disagree with Councilmember Zapata. I think that when you talk to the people in Roswell, if we are having any safety issues, meaning police and fire, they'll bring that up right away. People move to Roswell because they don't have those issues by and large, or they don't want to deal with those issues. Folks that move to less safe communities aren't as concerned about that. But in Roswell, I think that police and fire rise to that level where a goal should be identified with those two departments.
Okay, I see a head nodding. Yes, a thumbs up. Okay. Hearing no other comments about that, I'm going to take that as consensus, that you're going to keep that goal statement as is. Okay. Goal F is good governance through organizational excellence. There was complete agreement from the respondents to keep the goal and also the goal statement. There was a proposed revision that was not agreed to. Yes. Councilmember Palermo.
So I actually do like the revised one. I think it should mention business partners as well. So perhaps mentioning residential and business partners. But what I like about it is a couple things. One, it addresses exceptional quality of life. And number two, what I like about it is it mentions the communication. And I guess my issue is I supported the best practices earlier on the compromise Councilmember Wilsey mentioned, but I feel that is obviously very vague. And again, the last thing I'd want is, let's go back to transportation because it's an easy example that everybody can understand. If the best practice is to increase cut-through traffic, then that could be a best practice that's hidden behind, whereas this is just specifically saying, open governance through collaboration, innovation, and communication. And so I think it's important that we are clear and that we're not just kind of hiding behind best practice. That's what I kind of like about the revised statement.
Other comments? Yes, Councilmember Hall.
I'm in favor of the revised goal statement. I might have been the one that submitted it. I submitted so many things I can't remember, but I do like the revised.
Okay. 2 votes for the revised goal statement.
There are
Yes.
times when best practices are important for certifications, for public safety, and other things, even in rec and park items. And so I think, as I look at this, I think the best practice piece needs to be in there based on how municipal governments are required or encouraged at times to run. Does that mean we should not pay attention to better practices? That could it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you have to adherence to best practices is something that finance has to do in order to get their certifications and things like that. So I think that's important.
Councilmember Judy. As is. Okay. Yes, Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, I think the sticking point for me on the revision statement is that an exceptional quality of life is really much, much, much broader. This is certainly one aspect of it, but an exceptional quality of life basically, encompasses everything that we do. It's parks, it's transportation, it's we've included it as parks and recreation activities, but I think that's the sticking point for me to lead with that in this particular goal, is that it's much broader.
Other comments? Are we keeping that revised goal statement or not? We're kind of tied here, I think. I don't hear a clear consensus.
I think I'm keeping the original goal statement.
Keeping the original. Keeping the original.
And I definitely prefer the revised, but this update's not as important to me as some other stuff. So
Okay.
Certainly, I guess, open some compromise on this one.
Okay.
And even though, again, I really like the revised one, I think it really does do a good job of showing staff what we expect and our residents what we expect.
Councilmember Judy want to keep the original. Okay. There's our consensus. Goal H, exceptional quality of life. Agreement on both the goal and the goal statement. There was one comment to rename the goal, and I'm not quite sure to what. Comments? Yes, Councilmember Hall.
I think, let me just go back to my notes. I think this goal is all about rec and parks, and which is part of why we have such a great, exceptional quality of life in Roswell. But everything in the original objectives, as we identified it, is all about rec and parks. So I thought it'd be more appropriate to have it called something rec and parks.
Jeff?
So I just want to appreciate the comment from Councilmember Hall. And a lot of times my department is really focused on the recreation and park piece, but it also then, I try to be really careful not to leave out the historic assets and the cultural piece of the department. And so if you focus just on the title into that recreation and park, it has a tendency to potentially leave out those other elements, which is why we try to keep it general in that quality of life conversation, where community facilities and programs and events and partnerships are more encompassing, so that there can be elements that are added in. I'll use Doc's Cafe as a great example of an initiative that's coming in our future, that if you were just to have the recreation and park element, Doc's Cafe would have a trouble fitting in that space because the title becomes exclusive in that nature.
Other comments? I think we're keeping the goal as titled and the goal statement. Okay, now here's this new proposed goal, and it takes and it renames the goal to exceptional recreation and parks. There was not agreement on the naming of the new goal, nor the goal statement, because the statement itself is pretty much the same as exceptional quality of life. Any support for the new goal renaming and the focus?
I support it.
Okay. All right. Great.
For the record.
Okay, we are finished with all of. We need to go back to G. Thank you. G is intentional and balanced community growth. And it's not the goal itself, it's the goal statement.
The goal statement, or was it the key objectives that are
So
subsumed in that goal?
right. So for me, from a goal statement standpoint, it's that I feel there is a difference between growth and redevelopment, and redevelopment can include growth, but it doesn't always have to include growth, and I think that's what the focus should be. So I think redevelopment can include growth, but again, not always in not all situations. Whereas and then related to this was the concerns, the fact that we had priority concerns from residents from all that outreach that probably should be maybe addressed in the goal statement, but definitely within the objectives, and which is something I felt has not been done yet.
So intentional and balanced community redevelopment, or intentional and balanced community growth and redevelopment. First, Councilmember Tizer.
Yeah, I don't object to adding the word redevelopment, but I think general growth's important too, because some growth might not be physical.
Well, I guess my
But
I guess I'm confused, or I don't understand, because again, when I hear growth, it was like some residents that brought it up. You know, when I think growth, I think population growth, I think numbers. So redevelopment occurring, a new building being built, things like that. I see that as redevelopment. Whereas, and again, when I think growth, I'm thinking population number, and I don't want a strategic plan to be giving staff the recommendation or the guidance that they need to be looking for ways to, double our population or something along those lines.
I certainly would agree that we shouldn't be looking for ways to double our population, but there are lots of types of growth up to that level that we should be thinking about. And we should be thinking about it both from a quality of life standpoint and also from a fiscal standpoint, and determining, is there something that might not be redevelopment that should grow? And so I just think both words make sense to me. Adding the redevelopment is nice because it puts a focus on that piece for some of the places that clearly need to be redeveloped. But I also feel like growth's important.
Although my preference is just redevelopment, not growth as well. I mean, again, as I mentioned with the whole exercise, I don't see the value in pushing hard on one specific word. So, I think we could probably have some compromise there and mention both. But again, where I think it is important to move forward with the strategic plan is the concerns and the objectives here to make sure that we're really addressing them, which I know is probably a next step.
Councilmember Wiltie.
Yeah, I'll just step in if I could as editor again here. Just a suggestion, and that is that the last sentence might read, the city's economic strategies will promote sustainability, innovation, competitiveness, entrepreneurship, and vitality. And that way, I think we can all agree on vitality, but that puts the focus on economic strategies and the vitality on the outcomes. However, whether that's through growth or redevelopment, that really depends on the action item or the
Can you read that again, please?
Sure. I mean, basically, it's just to just take out growth and vitality strategies, just talk about economic strategies, and move vitality to the end of the sentence. I think that's what I'm hearing from Councilmember Palermo and Councilmember Tizer. I think that would help satisfy those concerns.
Mayor Henry.
And what I was going to say is I support taking out growth, but I do support your edits to it because I think that there is growth means different things to different people, obviously. And when we look at the reality, just about everything in Roswell will have to be redeveloped because we just don't have the land for new development. And the other thing with growth is I'm reminded about 15 years ago, we had an elected official running around Roswell saying tall buildings are tall taxes. So to me, that's what the picture I get with growth is tall buildings are tall taxes. And I don't think that's where any of us are going with this. So I would support your edits, but I'd also support not just taking out growth because I think that can be misleading.
Can you reread Marie's? Can you reread her edits?
Yeah, the first sentence would remain the same, which says adopt and implement policies, strategic plans, and master plans that support intentional and balanced growth initiatives consistent with the comprehensive plan previously.
May I point something out really quick? I'm sorry to interrupt. Marie, the statement you were just reading from is the second part of goal statement for goal B, but we're talking about goal G, which is the goal statement on the bottom of the slide.
That's why I was
that might be
confused.
why there's some confusion.
Thank you, Lenore.
You're welcome.
Oh, we all agree with that.
But it sounds good.
So, Marie,
I think the same thing. I think you could just take out growth and you've got the
that supports intentional and balanced initiatives. Just remove the word growth from the sentence entirely.
that support intentional and balanced initiatives. Growth is gone. Everything else is the same. Mayor, did you have a comment you wanted to make? Okay.
Did you need me to read that again now that I have it right? Or is everybody on the same page? Okay, it would say adopt and implement policies, strategic plans, and master plans that support intentional and balanced initiatives consistent with the comprehensive plan, previously adopted plans in conjunction with regional plans and identified best practices in municipal development and planning.
Councilmember Zapata, do you have your hand up?
So, I was following this conversation and, I was listening, the confusion between community growth and population growth. So I think, and I went back to my notes here early on the presentation today, and I have the same confusion. And then maybe we want to clarify what community growth means. Are we talking about economic and cultural growth, or any other kind of growth, including population growth? So I would like to suggest to be more specific when we talk about community growth. Like the mayor said, community growth means so many things for so many people. So are we referring to economic and cultural, or any kind of other growth on the community? We want to include population growth into the definition of community growth. So I think that, again, it's very generic and confusing, and invite to different interpretation community growth. So only suggestion here is to be more specific when we refer to community growth on this study.
Councilmember Wilsey.
I would just say to that point, I think what we would need to do is to refer back to the comp plan. Yeah. And those adopted plans and what is, projected and planned. And so, Lenore, I would look to you to see how we might, word that, or if there's anything specific from the comp plan that we could bring into this as kind of an overall goal for planning.
Lenore?
My recommendation would not be to bring the specifics from the comp plan back to the strategic plan, because the strategic plan should be feeding into the comp plan. To address what Councilmember Zapata said, from a planning perspective, growth could mean all of those things. I think that's a good point to raise, and the comp plan does address all sorts of topics, whether it is talking about cultural or population. The other thing I would suggest is one of the things that Councilmember Palermo raised as being a concern from the residents is supporting growth. And does that mean we're encouraging population growth? I think what might be a better way to term it is to address it, because if our plans aren't prepared for all kinds of growth, whether it's redevelopment, population growth, because we can have population growth without redevelopment. Families grow. So I think that if we have plans that address those things, might be better than support, in order for it not to read as if we are encouraging that growth, but rather we're prepared for it. Other than that, I think using redevelopment versus growth, I'm not sure how much difference it makes from an overarching goal. I think what will be more important, as we've talked about, is those next steps and those implementation plans. And one of the first implementation plans that you would be approving as a next step for this goal is going to be the comprehensive plan, which starts to get into those more details. And then there's the even further drilled down implementation plans that are a component of that you would also be approving. I hope that helps.
Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you. Lenore, would you have a recommendation for wording then?
Yes, the only thing I personally would recommend would be the replacement of the word support with prepare, and I don't know that prepare for isn't the right word, but address those growth initiatives would be, I think, a better term to use. Whether you use growth or redevelopment, I don't have any way to advise you on which one would be a better choice of words.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
It would say adopt and implement policies, strategic plans, and master plans that address intentional and balanced initiatives consistent with the comprehensive plan, previously adopted plans. You can read the rest. The rest stays the same. But we're basically replacing two things. We're taking out the word growth, and then instead of support, it would be address. See some heads shaking. Does that work for now?
I think that worked.
Councilmember Palermo.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little less concerned with the individual words and more focused on the concerns and the objectives under here.
Okay. Did we decide on intentional and balanced community redevelopment or growth and redevelopment?
About although I prefer just redevelopment, what about redevelopment/growth?
Agreed.
That's fine. That's fine.
Intentional and balanced community growth/redevelopment. Redevelopment/growth is where we came down on it. Redevelopment first. Okay, great. Okay, Amy, I think I'm going to hand it back over to you because we're finished with all of the goals and the goal statements.
So
Before
what I heard
lunch.
is that we want to get into the objectives for goal G. Is that right? We have agreed on all the goal statements with the changes that we discussed. And it sounds like we need to get into the key objectives for goal G, which if you have the strategic plan that we've been working with, then you would have those. Can you bring that up on your? And Jacqueline can bring it up on her computer. If you have your the strategic plan, it would be page 14 of the strategic plan that is the draft that was in front of you before. And I do want to say, how many people have it? Do you have it in front of you, or are we going to be working off of the screen? Do people have it with them? I see some. I just want to mention that because there were concerns about the success measures, what our view is that we do not have success measures in the strategic plan, and that we let staff suggest those success measures to you once we have the key objectives all defined, once the strategic plan's passed, everything like that. We're not going to, it's not worth quibbling over success measures now because you have a whole unit to talk about key performance indicators and all that. And so we're going to let Harpreet and her staff help with that as you go forward. So I just want you, since we're now going to look at these in more detail, that will come later, and you can agree on them later. So the key objectives, so you've got 6 key objectives right now. I'm going to read them because in case it's hard to see on the screen. First was implement the strategies identified in the comprehensive plan. Next, number 2 is complete key small area master plans in preparation for future growth. 3 is evaluate and update the Unified Development Code and Zoning Code to include regulations that foster redevelopment. 4, conduct a formal professional recodification of adopted codes and ordinances. 5, evaluate and update the design guidelines to reflect current best practices in local planning. And 6 is create zoning incentives to encourage redevelopment in target areas identified in Goal B. And so those were hand in hand with Goal B. So I think it's worth hearing then, Mike, what your comments are. Clearly there's a lot that reflects redevelopment, or several key objectives. What are your concerns about what's here now, or is it adding to it or subtracting from it?
Sure. So my biggest concern is that if we look at the residents' biggest concerns from all of our outreach, the two biggest concerns that they gave, or the two most common concerns that came from those thousands of residents, are within, I would say, this goal. And so basically, I want to pull up, and I know you had mentioned what they were when we first had our first session verbally, but then Kyle, when he presented to us last time, you had him give a slide that showed the concerns, and my issue is it's just not incorporating what those two top concerns were, and I feel this is an area that we can do that and be responsive to the residents.
Can you give us some suggestions about what you would like? And Jacqueline will
Unfortunately, I don't think I got a copy of his deck, or if I did, it was only email. I never got a printout of his deck. Do we have that deck that he had presented
this morning?
No, the one that he presented at that Zoom meeting last time.
I do not have.
So I think Councilmember Hall had actually tracked it down. It's on the website. Okay, that'd be great. But basically, just looking for a way for verbatim to address them. Like one of them was something along the lines of poor or development decisions leading to poor outcomes. And so what I want to really discuss is, what do we feel here addresses that? And then number two, or what do we add to address that? And I think the number 2 was developments being approved that don't have the infrastructure to support it, or something along those lines. And because I feel like we some of these are actually starting to address them. I'm just concerned it's vague, and I don't want something that's not clear to staff on which kind of direction to be going. So those are the 2 updates, as well as item number 2. I think in preparation for future redevelopment makes more sense than growth, because again, I think some of our small area master plans, I wouldn't consider really growing as much as just purely redeveloping. So those are my 3 items that I think can make some great progress on this.
So can you let's talk about 2, since it's right up there. And you wanted to change the word growth to redevelopment, future redevelopment, or growth and redevelopment? Or
I prefer just redevelopment, but
yes, Matt.
So to Councilmember Palermo's comment about poor outcomes, I think number 2 should be highly focused on the concept of future redevelopment, because that's how I think you take care of poor outcomes, is by defining what a good outcome is before you have a poor outcome. And so I think changing future growth to future redevelopment is a fairly significant and positive change on this one. And I'm thinking specifically about the area around the police station and that whole area that we did the mini master plan for. The next step of that is to go out and find people to actually do it. But now we know what our citizens wanted there, because there was a fairly extensive outreach that was done, and then some professionals who did kind of a mini master plan. And that, I think just a very simple change, as he suggested, future growth to future redevelopment on that one, without the word growth, it gets you a long way there.
So I think that definitely improves number 2, and completely agree on that. My concern is, so I think an ideal is absolutely we should complete key small area master plans in preparation for future redevelopments. I think that's great, and I think that does help. The problem is, I think from a financial standpoint and from a timing standpoint, we're not going to be able to have a small area master plan for every single part of the city. Roswell's a big city, and yet we do end up potentially getting rezoning or conditional use applications potentially all over the city. And technically the area has been somewhat reduced with recent changes to the UDC. With a new zoning code that could be changed, it could be opened up to citywide again. And so I think we've got to make sure that staff understands as they're giving recommendations, they're following a strategic plan, that we are addressing these concerns and not encouraging these concerns. Ultimately, if there's a request, mayor and council can obviously override staff's recommendations. They can override whatever's in the strategic plan. There's no question in that. Ultimately, mayor and council will have the final say. But just my concern is, density is a big conversation and a big concern among many residents and a big debate within Roswell. And yet we don't have anything that's addressing that. So therefore, to staff, and if anything, I think this is one of the things that's been challenging on staff is you potentially have, a number of elected officials that are, really just really wanting to do things that push for a vision of Roswell, keeping its current character and why many people move to Roswell, et cetera, and wanting to discuss with staff how do we best implement that the way that Alpharetta and Milton has been doing a better job around that. And then there are potentially other elected officials, whether it's on this council or future councils, where they have more of a push where they do want to see more density, more urbanism, aspects like that, and staff stuck in the middle. And I'm concerned without addressing it and addressing that elephant in the room and having this tough conversation, staff continues to be stuck in the middle, being pulled in two different directions. Whereas, and I think it should be pulled in no directions. It should be we all agree on what the objectives for staff should be as they're providing us guidance and working on best practices, et cetera. And then obviously a future council, if they have different views, they always could change this and therefore change the guidance to staff. That's my perception of how I feel a strategic plan is working. So let me know if I'm misunderstanding anything either from your standpoint or from staff's standpoint.
Matt?
So I understand what's trying to be done here. And I don't know if this is the place for it. I think that you get into subjective situations. So what is a poor outcome? A poor outcome could be, and we'll just take an example. There's over behind the police station, there's now a storage building. It's a very nice storage building, probably one of the nice storage buildings you've ever seen. I know a lot of people that think that was a poor outcome because it was turned down for residential. Okay, anyway. They ended up putting it as a storage unit because there wasn't support of the residential. So they think that that's a poor outcome. So we can get into what's a poor outcome, what's not a poor outcome. I think that's very subjective. I think we need to stay away from that because that's going to change from council to council to council, from maybe year to year, depending on external outcomes or variables. So what I think we need to do is make sure that this points to whatever the code ends up saying when we pass stuff as a council, and therefore that travels with who we are as a council and as a city versus putting in a strategic plan and saying what is a poor outcome. I think that's going to be a tough thing to. I mean, what are we going to do? Take a poll of the city and say what's a poor outcome? Because there's a lot of people that speak up and there's a lot of people that don't speak up, and so what are you going to do there? So I think we got to be very careful on that situation, and that goes both ways. So, and as far as the urbanism and all that stuff, I don't think there's anybody on this council that thinks that. I think that we all want to protect Roswell and where it is. So I don't think we're apart as much as we want to act like we are. I think we are pretty much on the same path. We just need to set a goal or objectives here on where to look on where we're going as far as the council and our policies.
Excellent. Some great commentary and definitely very healthy discussion. What I would say with that that number one concern that came from the residents, it specifically said poor decisions leading to poor outcomes, something, or rush decisions, something along those lines. So having an applicant choose not to move forward and to make their official request, I don't feel that's what was covered. But I do actually agree with the concern that there is some subjectivity, and obviously this needs to be a strategic plan, not a zoning code and things like that, but just something for staff to really work with. So with that, I'll acknowledge that I probably have to think a little more on that first concern on how can that be addressed and how do we ensure that, but I think those were valid points. So I'd actually like to focus more on the second point, because I think the second largest concern from residents is one that actually I think has not really been addressed and should be addressed more. And it was just basically how do we have, and this probably will need some input from legal, but how do we ensure staff is providing recommendations and information based on infrastructure and those aspects, because I feel that's something that hasn't been done. I feel when I watch zoning decisions in Alpharetta, it's something that is taken into account, but it seems to me that in Roswell we'll have large increases to density when the streets can't necessarily handle it, the sewage, water, all these different aspects that are challenges that I feel are never a part of the discussion. And so I think that should be an objective to address that concern from residents. And I don't have the answer right now on the best way to do it, but it's something I'd love to hear from ComDev, legal, counsel, et cetera, on how we look at being a little more forward thinking with our decision-making process.
I agree with that, actually. I think that if you look at an Alpharetta ComDev plan, and as our community development evolves into the next phase here, you have all of the departments weigh in on this ComDev plan. And you have legal saying, does this affect health, safety, welfare? You have, what are the potential legal issues? Then you have Public Works say, is there an infrastructure problem? You have police and fire say, is this within the zone? So in that plan, or plans I've seen from the other cities and also Alpharetta exactly, because I actually pulled this at one point and said, this would be very helpful because it's written right here. So there's no ambiguity in what it is. So I 100% agree with that. If we could get a report on all that for each thing we do, then I think it makes zoning decisions a lot easier, and it will take a lot of the guesswork and controversy out of council's decisions.
So is there a suggestion about wording that you'd like to see? Marcella, do you have a suggestion about that?
I have a different point here. So, following this conversation, do we need to be more specific on the objective, saying, okay, we want to urbanize the city of Roswell, so then all staff members knows where we're going, so when they come with their, because we start talking about this document will help with accountability of not only staff members, but also elected officials. I understood that this is what was said, that this document helps to bring accountability. So, given a specific vision or objective or goal is not a bad idea. So, because then we'll make accountability to staff recommendations and to elected official voting record. So if the goal is to, urbanize Roswell, we should put it here. Let's put it here because then, staff and elected officials know what to follow with the recommendations and the voting. So I don't see a problem to add more specific goals, like this one, for example, that just came out during this discussion.
Okay, what I heard was not about urbanizing. What I heard was that you would like to have a key objective that says that for that infrastructure and other impacts to the city as a whole should be considered as part of any proposal. I don't know, I don't want to put words in, but that was the gist that I was hearing. So anybody who has a suggestion about the infrastructure issues, and please.
Yes, I think a report from on all issues involving a zoning, I guess, element should be weighed in on from staff in writing before the decision on key elements of what that is. Now, what is that? I think that will have to come from a recommendation from staff, but I think infrastructure, I think legal, I think police and fire, I think those things, because what I hear a lot of sometimes is we don't have the infrastructure to do it. And then you go talk to Public Works, oh, well, yeah, we've got the infrastructure. And then you hear, well, that's not legal, or that's legal, or not legal, and you go in, well, it's exactly opposite of what's being said. So if it's right here, it's in front of us, I think it helps us all. So I'm all for that.
Mike, did you have any words that you want to throw out there too? I mean, I get the main idea. Now we're more into wordsmithing. And
yeah, so, at first I was thinking more specific, but then as I kind of hear the discussion, it does sound a little more high level. So I lean towards just to get the discussion started, just a goal that staff is going to provide information on impacts or effect to infrastructure, something along those lines, something to just try to align with the concern, because it does sound like we're in agreement on doing something with it a little more, but it's just I'm not sure the right wording.
I don't think it can just be infrastructure. I think it's going to be on all elements of the development.
It's probably the impacts on services, on city services, as well as infrastructure. I mean, the point of.
I also think legal. So if you're going to throw this in there and you're going to go down the whole thing, we need to know from soup to nuts what it is. So you can't just take one part of a development or an issue and say, well, that's all we're going to do. So if we're going to do this, I think it's got to be everything.
Well,
go ahead.
So, I mean, that's where I definitely want legal's guidance on what we should add in and what that output should look like. But we also intentionally, ultimately, we don't want legal just purely making decisions. We want to make sure they're avoiding us from having anything illegal. So if it is illegal for ComDev to say, XYZ about this development, then we want to make sure legal's leaving that out. But ultimately, we absolutely should not be looking for legal to make the decisions, because a legal decision is always going to be, well, it's always easier if you just say yes to anything asked. That's always the easiest legal position, but that's not what's best for our community.
We're talking about a staff report of the implication of legal service delivery, infrastructure, of the implications of any action.
There we go. Yes, they're not making a decision. I think information based upon the implications. I like that word of a decision being made, because like we talked a lot about Alpharetta. In there it says, does this impact health, safety, and welfare in the eyes of city legal? That's something we should know.
So, but here's the issue with that. If we also always have to prepare for litigation. So if there's something where legal is saying, these are concerns, and then we vote no on something, then that's just opening up, hey, even their own lawyer said this was legal. And here's a real example where that was the case. There was a situation where basically legal in private gave the concern. There was a situation where there was a request that it was completely clear and transparent that a neighborhood was absolutely going to be completely changed, real bad. It would have been a real negative impact to a neighborhood in the heart of suburban residential. And legal gave the concerns that they gave basically their legal opinion, which ended up differing from council's decision. And it ended up actually, the city's decision ended up surviving and being supported. So therefore, if instead if instead legal gave that advice, then we would have basically been setting ourselves up to lose a lawsuit, whereas instead legal gave their advice in private, and the city ended up really saving that neighborhood, as well as being able to win the potential legal challenges and all that. So that's the issue where legal is something different. Public Works, no concern, should absolutely share all of it. If there's no impact or worry to Public Works, or there's a big one, that should be documented, all those different aspects. But legal giving their advice on aspects, I think that is completely losing our opportunity to protect our neighborhoods and control our zoning code. Mr. Davidson, I would be curious here.
So basically, the whole time I've been city attorney or assistant city attorney here, I tried to not put anything in writing. So, and that's in order to protect you. You have attorney-client privilege. Once I put it in writing and it's out in the public, then it's out in the public, and it can be used against you. And then when you start making arbitrary and capricious decisions, then that leads to personal liability. So my job is to protect the city, and as its elected officials, to protect you. So that's what I try to do. That's why we have legal meetings before zonings. You know, I tell you in there what my opinion is. There's been times where I've, had to go against pretty much all of council and the mayor, and I've put stuff in writing because it would be inappropriate for me not to, because I thought y'all were going down, not this council, but prior councils were going down the wrong way. And so, I don't do it. I can if you want me to. I don't have a problem doing that, but that's going to be up to y'all.
So I understand that. But I also, it's put many people in bad positions because you're being told one thing one way, and then out politically it's being told another way. And so if we do end up getting sued as a city because we passed something, because we kept it quiet, that costs taxpayers money. And so at the end of the day, I mean, we've talked a lot about Alpharetta and what they do, and there's things that when you go through a zoning, it asks health, safety, and welfare, right? Okay, so I don't understand why we can't say, does this impact the health, safety, and welfare in the opinion of the city attorney? There's certain things that I believe we should be able to say. So I think whether, again, I said I'm not in the details today. This is a here discussion. So I would like to keep that in there and figure out what that is that we can put in a zoning code that is relevant to the citizens, is transparent, because we talk about transparency a lot. And I think as a citizen, they'd like to know actually what we're dealing with behind the dais. Because I hear a lot of things, hey, don't say anything about that. And then I get up there and I get totally creamed politically because I'm doing what I've been told to protect the city of Roswell. So if we're going to go down this road, I think that's where we need to be. I don't know what that looks like right now, but I don't think I could support changing this without a complete staff report on including an element of legal.
I'll put stuff in writing if that's the will of council. That's totally up to you. I wouldn't recommend it, but that's totally up to you.
What if we can come up with some wording of that says that well, go ahead, Mary, you have an idea. Maybe you can just end this instead of my idea.
Well, I would just like to pipe up and say the legal issues to me are completely separate from service and infrastructure. And over the years, I think maybe if David and I thought about it while we're eating lunch, we could probably come up 2 hands of lawsuits that we have won that legal advised us against making that decision. So I think it was going back to something Councilmember Palermo said and something that David and I have talked about over the years. He will give his legal advice. That doesn't mean we have to take it. We're elected officials. We might make his job a little harder in defending us, but that's why he's making the big bucks.
Okay. Marie.
Yes, thank you. I mean, one of the things to me, I think we could address these issues, up front in our plans, in the comprehensive plan and the small area master plans, just by making sure that they include some attention to infrastructure, transportation, public works needs, as these plans are being developed. And that way, that also helps us set expectations for desired outcomes from the community. So I think that would make our job a lot easier going forward. I think what we're going to see with a comprehensive plan coming forward is, some really good direction on community areas and where redevelopment should be focused. So anyway, just a thought. I mean, I really think that if we look to the tools that we have, and work towards implementing them, that should be our guide.
So we have, lunch is ready, which I'm sure is a big relief to everybody. But what I don't want to do is come back here and be still ruminating on the same thing. So I would like to ask for a couple volunteers over lunch to write something to propose to the rest of the group when we come back, or we're just going to be in the same spot, but then we'll be asleep because we've eaten. So please.
If I could suggest, I don't want to give Lenore any more work. However, they do the department plan reviews, and it goes to fire, it goes to public works, it goes to transportation, and it's all done already at a staff level. So what I'm hearing is council wants it in front of them in a packet. So I think that that's probably an easy one, and Lenore could probably come up with some easy language for that.
Well, I have a bit of a question. We do already have a staff report that's provided in your packets to council. Those staff reports are generated because all of the departments have reviewed whatever the development is. And this, speaking specifically about rezonings, but all of our applications are reviewed by all departments, whether it's a single family house who's adding a bedroom, all departments that would be impacted from a service infrastructure perspective are reviewing those. But for rezoning, as an example, the staff report does include any comments that are generated by the various departments. And if a department has reviewed for whatever service or infrastructure that they generate, whatever that development's impact will be on that infrastructure is required to be addressed as a part of that development project. And so, for example, if it's related to transportation, if all of the traffic and transportation issues related to infrastructure are addressed by that development, then that department would approve that plan is able to move forward as shown from that perspective. So that statement isn't necessarily there. So I think that that's something that's very easy to be added to the staff reports to state this has been reviewed, et cetera. And my only point to making that is an action item implementation feature. In my personal opinion, it's not a key objective. The key objective is the comprehensive plan, and the comprehensive plan does cover transportation, rec and parks, utilities, et cetera, as a part of making sure that those developments that are coming in are not overtaxing. So we have impact fees. There's some tools we could talk about later that get into, again, some of those action items for what are incentives for encouraging redevelopment in places where we do have that infrastructure already in place, et cetera. So I'm happy to write an objective and help write one. I'm not sure that an objective is the right way to handle that. I think that is more of an implementation and making sure that whatever that format is that this council wants to see, we get for you. And that is absolutely something that is doable. I have no issue with that whatsoever.
Well, and that was my point, is that we're already doing it. So this is more of an action item, as you said, a formatting issue. And I don't think that that's been clear in the past. So I agree with you. I don't know if it's an objective, maybe a word or two in there that would be clearer. But the staff can start doing this tomorrow.
Yes,
no
ma'am.
questions asked, hands down.
And so I agree that you could definitely start, doing tomorrow, and there's some stuff they've already been doing. But I think clearly, based on the large number of respondents that see this as a concern and something that's not happening enough, that's where I think it needs to be a part of the strategic plan. And I actually have a real life example where none of us were on council during it. And so first off, actually, the chief was standing up, and he brought or actually, I guess I should say, I'm very confident in those staff reports that the fire department, it's going to be crystal clear, black and white. Either there's enough room to fit, a fire engine, or there's not enough room to fit the fire engine. So we're going to get that, staff's going to make that aware. Sorry, we can't even support this going to council because the fire truck can't fit there. So no issues there. Where it becomes, I feel, more questionable and I think worth discussion is whether it's around public works, is, what is the impact to our system, some of our different systems, what they might be. But then again, having to go back to RDOT. But here's the real life example. So none of this council were on council when Vickers was approved. When Vickers was approved, there obviously would have been the full staff reports. There would have been impact fees. There probably were updates, potentially to the entrance to those things. And so RDOT would have weighed in. And obviously that was before Mr. Ralph was the director. A year or two after Vickers was approved, there was a request that came to council for council to pay for a stoplight at North Coleman, one that was very important, I strongly support, but the reason brought up on why it was being prioritized, in a public meeting, the director brought this up, that given the expected increase of traffic and other aspects in intensity from Vickers, that's what really accelerated and made that stoplight so important. Yet that was never brought up in any presentation to council, anything at the zoning hearing. And so I bring this up as an example of just, I'd love to hear from staff brainstorming, it's not just ComDev, that's ComDev, that's Public Works, that's RDOT, what more, and legal as well, what more could be done to ensure that we're seeing the fully transparent good, the bad, and the ugly of any decision that we make, and the impact potentially to infrastructure and other aspects, to make sure that we're finding some way to address that concern. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, so we're going to break for lunch, and Jacqueline and I are going to work with Lenore to figure out if there's a way to just reemphasize what's already being done so that it's very clear in these objectives that even though it's reiteration, that then it will be stated there. So we'll try that. So I think lunch is set up in the room directly as you leave here. Turn left and left again. And if we could, let's try to reconvene at 1:45. If that's, I don't know if we need more time than that. It'd be lovely if we could do that. Let's give it a try. I don't know how, I'm not sure what lunch is or how long it's going to take. So let's shoot for 1:45, and hopefully we can come back and wrap this up. Thanks. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully we can keep our energy up until 2. While you were eating, before we were eating, we came up with a potential key objective. And as we all know, this is being done, but if the idea is that it's important to articulate it, what Lenore helped us with is evaluate health, safety, and wellness, services and infrastructure impacts of all programs, of all projects. So, because of the little bit of consternation about legal, we kept the word legal out. Matt, but the idea, as you said from Alpharetta, was health, safety, and wellness impacts. So it gives a nod toward that aspect, but we didn't specifically say legal. And if you know, whatever, you can, oh, welfare, okay, well, that'll be changed. So, but the point was just to not pin it down that way in this. So it's up to you all, obviously. Welfare. Okay. So, but we're getting to those aspects that were important, as you pointed out. So we've got health, safety, and welfare, service and infrastructure impacts of all projects. So, how does that feel? Mike, does that get to does that help with?
It does not. 2 reasons. So although it doesn't say legal, that still basically is trying to give a legal opinion on it, because basically what I've been taught is the legal architecture of how a lawsuit works is it looks purely to those things. And so by documenting, by having staff give guidance on it, it's basically, I see it as a litigation aspect. Because so for example, we have closure. So I want as much as possible outside in the public realm. The only things that we can legally talk about in closure are personnel, real estate deals, and litigation. And we have the legal right to decide we don't want to discuss any of that in closure. We want to discuss it all out front. But the reason we choose to discuss it in closure is because basically you open the city up to risk. So if we're negotiating a real estate deal and we're just doing that in public, obviously we're just going to increase the cost of it. If we're going through all the legal arguments and our legal strategy and all that stuff for litigation, we do that in public, then obviously we're opening ourselves up to just increased litigation. So I have concerns with getting that specific and it ultimately being a legal aspect. So here's the exact concern that I wanted to address. So again, the first one was development and growth pressures leading to poor outcomes. So therefore, what are we doing to make sure that we don't feel there's a growth pressure? And then separately, the second one, which we're discussing now, is increasing congestion and pressures on infrastructure. So therefore, what I want to address and make sure that we're addressing for the residents is, does staff understand that we want to be fully aware and mitigate any issues affecting or creating congestion or pressures on infrastructure? And those are the 2 things that I feel are not being addressed here that need to be addressed.
Can you give me an idea about what you'd like to see then instead of what we wrote?
Sure. So,
can you do that?
As I think back to that Vickers example with the stoplight, but there was never any transparency or even just disclosure, probably even to council, that it would need, that is that staff takes a holistic approach in providing information on the pressures from infrastructure on decisions made by council, something along those lines.
So the idea that we had about evaluating all these things, you only want infrastructure.
So my issue is that's getting into something where it's creating a whole lot of subjectivity, it's creating some legal aspect, and ultimately it's council's responsibility to decide the welfare. What are those 3 things?
Health, safety, and welfare.
And that ultimately is a council decision. That's a policy decision. That doesn't come from staff, because that's ultimately what we're making our decision on.
Right. That was okay.
Yeah. We take in all the factors, see how it affects those things, and council makes their decision. Staff can't make that decision. But what staff can do is make sure to tell us, hey, even though from a transportation standpoint, we told you about the 2 streets right there in front of the building, what we didn't tell you is that actually a half a mile down the road, we're going to create a lot of congestion, and you're going to have to put in a new stoplight to address it. So that's where this is more than just writing something in the strategic plan. This is actually, I think, about really improving a process and looking at all aspects of this great concern, which is, again, increasing congestion and pressure on infrastructure.
Okay. Matt?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, Councilman Palermo, when you talk about that sentence, which I'm not sure I disagree with, Are we talking about, are we always going to make sure that we're using facts? And I'll give you a live example. We have a resident who stands up periodically and tells us that we're going to run out of water. And we call up our director of environmental public works, and he uses facts to say that that's not the case. I just want to make sure that when you talk about this, and facts are available, that you do mean that we would use those facts.
So that, I think that's a perfect example that absolutely Public Works, I want them to know that, nope, don't worry. If we build this new office building, we're not going to run out of water no matter what anybody that's not as familiar with our water system might say. And vice versa, if down the road, I hope this never happens, there's droughts, there's an issue, something along those lines, if there ever is an issue, that again, it would be our expert that knows our system that says, you know, we've basically reached our water capacity, and if we are going to approve, you know, more whatever, you know, square footage, more anything, then I think we're going to have to add to our water plan. So does that answer your question? Are we on the same page there?
I'm sort of working the inverse. If they stand up and say this won't cause a problem, does that hold weight? I was going to say, does that hold water? But that would be.
So I'd say I'm open to your suggestion. I think it is helpful if staff's going to say, don't worry, we fully understand our water capacity. We've got 30% more capacity, and this potential council decision is only going to affect 1% of that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Here's a suggestion. Staff provides a holistic approach to information on transportation and infrastructure impacts for each project? Or?
Yeah, and more holistic, because again, they already do, but it's just, is it being as holistic as possible? And again, I keep on going back to that Vickers example because I think it's a good, clear one, and again, nothing that any of us elected officials were on at that time.
Staff provides I can't even read it.
A holistic?
Provides, there's something, word provides missing. Staff provides a holistic approach to,
It's not approach, though. It's a holistic.
Evaluation. It's evaluation is what you're asking
yeah.
for. So staff provides a holistic evaluation on the transportation and infrastructure impacts of a project. Does that meet your needs? How about everybody else? Okay. Staff provides a holistic evaluation of transportation and infrastructure issues and impacts, or it should be impacts, just impacts, I think. If you could write that out again, and then we'll read it one more time, because I don't want to take that home and then not know what we said. But that would, okay, so is that good then? We're going to add that to the key objectives.
So I think that's good for addressing that one. Goes back to, we had, I thought, a very healthy dialogue with Councilman Judy, brought up some good points where regarding the one that was the number one, poor outcomes, certainly very subjective, and I agree with that completely. But interestingly enough, as I look at the exact wording, it was growth pressures leading to poor outcomes. And so that is where I think it is helpful to have within our strategic plan, something making it clear that we don't want staff to feel there's pressure that they have, around increasing growth, et cetera. I think there is unanimous support that there is pressure that we do want redevelopment. I think that's unanimous. I certainly strongly want redevelopment. I strongly want increased economic activity and economic development, so there's no question in that. But just again, that goes back to my concern with the word growth, that I don't feel there should be growth pressures, and it is understandable that residents are concerned that leads to poor outcomes.
And we changed the name of the goal, if you remember, and we changed several words that got rid of growth. I hope that does it. Matt, you have a comment?
Yes, I'm not going to hold up my support of the strategic plan on this, but I will say that I wholly disagree with taking out the legal aspect of this, and the reason why I do is I feel like it allows for political play to the detriment of the citizens. When we have one side of the argument behind closed doors, that we're being told one thing, and then it's not shown to the citizens of what really is happening and what really we have to make a decision on. And so keeping that out of play, I think is, it might keep us, might put our us at risk, but the problem is when we have council members or people that don't follow the legal advice given and put the citizens at risk, then I can't sit back and say, all right, so when this does happen from now on, I'll say, hey, look, in the strategic plan, I wanted to put this in there because it is relevant to this situation. I might not like the project, but I also have weighed the risks of where we are. And so where we are as a city and what it might cost us should we make another decision. So I think keeping that out is non-transparent and not good, but I'm not going to hold up the strategic plan. I'll go along with this, but I'm just going to go on record saying that I totally disagree with that.
So, and I respectfully disagree with that position, because what legal provides is they provide their opinion. And as Mayor Henry had brought up, she brought up that, and I saw Mr. Davidson nodding his head yes, there's probably been, you can count on two hands times where legal gave their legal guidance or their legal opinion on a zoning decision, and there was a lawsuit and the city won, and because it is just ultimately legal opinion. And again, there's an example where this council received the exact legal opinion saying, hey, this situation needs to occur. This council unanimously decided that they were not going to follow the legal opinion because they knew the right thing to do and had a different opinion, was to really protect this large neighborhood, and it was successful. So we protected that neighborhood, and and legally we ended up being proven that we were in the right. So my issue is the same reason that we choose to go into closure to make sure legal litigation, and the same reason we go into closure regarding real estate negotiations, by putting legal opinions that may or may not be right, because again, no attorney can always know exactly how a judge is going to feel. So to put their opinion is going to just basically sway the decision, and frankly sway the judge's opinion as well. So that's something that I feel, for the good of the city, we absolutely take the legal opinion, but we do what's right. And frankly, even a lot of the time, the legal opinion that we get, it often won't be, this will definitely happen. That example was, here's what we think will definitely happen. But a lot of the time is just, here's concerns, here's it on the fence. And again, to document that, I feel is a great benefit to applicants, but a great detriment to really Roswell residents, our zoning code, and the ability to protect the character of Roswell.
And we're going to agree to disagree on this, and it's definitely not to the detriment or for the applicants or this, that, and the other, which you're trying to pin on me. It's not the case. What I'm trying to say is if we're going to have reports on things, we should have reports on everything. If we're going to be transparent, let's be transparent. Let's not have it both ways. So I, again, agree to disagree on this, and I'm ready to move forward.
Okay, let's move on. So this says staff provides a holistic evaluation of transportation and infrastructure impacts of projects.
So I need a clarification. So you say we move on with the legal element or without the legal?
No, I think that you're saying we can move on without it for now. So.
Yes, I said that very clearly 3 times.
Okay.
Okay, so we've addressed this issue, I think, by adding a key objective. I hope that we've addressed the growth issue by renaming this goal to say intentional and balanced community redevelopment / growth. So we're really, I think, in that case, putting redevelopment first, and then we also rewrote the goal statement to take out the word growth. And so I did that. Will that satisfy that need? And I think with the transportation goal also, I mean, I think those taken together as a whole really gets to the issue. Certainly, if you're not just cherry picking, then you could see how important you value as a council the impacts of all of this on neighborhoods. And I mean, I think it really does speak to that. I hope anyway. Okay. Okay, great. Well, then we have a couple other things. Some of these are now, I think, rendered moot because of previous decisions you made, but we didn't want to not go there. So Jacqueline's, but one of the key issues is about prioritizing these goals. And so I'm going to let Jacqueline go through, well, maybe, go through most of you said that you wanted to prioritize the goals. I'll just tee it up for her as she's doing the survey results. So you said, yes, you wanted to prioritize the goals. And so the question is then, how do you want to, well, not how, but what do you want to come first in the order? And Kyle gave us the order that the respondents had, I can tell you, the order that the survey respondents said when they were asked about priorities, Goal B, which was economic vitality and sustainability, was rated as first by the, now again, people who responded. Goal E, safety and security, and by the way, I think most of you wanted to drop the letters also, but I'm going to still keep referring to it because it's easier that way. So first on the list with 19% was Goal B, economic vitality and sustainability. Goal E was next, which is safe and secure community. Goal H, exceptional quality of life, was next. Then G, intentional and balanced redevelopment, community redevelopment / growth. Then was A, which was dynamic transportation network that optimizes mobility. Then was C, outstanding city services. Then F, good governance, and then D. So that is at least an indication of how the people who responded felt. And we need to hear from you about, well, as you can see. Oh, wait, so it wasn't. I'm wrong. I remembered this incorrectly. 2 and 2 said prioritize the goals. So I guess that's the first question. I'm going to let you do this.
The goals should be prioritized. And one of the key comments was that one of you was supportive of prioritizing them in response to the public input received, and that's what Amy was just going over with you. The priorities from the reaction survey.
So, thank you. So I really don't see it as prioritizing because there's parts of each one that might be done first before parts of another one. I see it more as listing them. And I'm perfectly fine with using the methodology that y'all just suggested, where you go through the way 100 and some people responded that they thought they were important. Again, that's not the order you're necessarily going to do things in. It's not possible to do them, to tick them off one at a time because they're interrelated. So I'm fine, using that order, starting with the 18% and working your way down. That it doesn't matter as much to me.
Okay. Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you. So prioritization is very important to me. But to clarify, I'm fine either way, whether it's this is first, this is second, this is third, or it just ends up being these are high, these are medium, these are lower, and but these 4 high, they're all high together and they're all interrelated. I'm flexible either way and supportive either way. But the reason I think this is so crucial is as I mentioned, my concern was, so what's interesting is I did not take a vote, but at the same time, I'm 90% sure that second bullet is my quote.
Yeah, we added your comments into the presentation.
All right, thank you. But yeah, because basically that was a concern I brought up even when we initially had that Zoom that said I felt it wasn't ready, and my concern that staff would focus on a low priority for citizens over a high priority. And then in fact, we, I believe as a council, got an email that potentially prior to this being adopted and agreed upon, that staff might actually end up using their resources to focus on the thing that was the lowest priority. So it was my exact concern, and it's something that was definitely shown as possible. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we are being really resident focused and citizen focused, and that's why I think that we need to priority. But again, not that which one's first, which one's second. I care less about that. I'm more of, all right, staff, here's the absolute priority for residents versus here's the more nice to have accomplishments, but don't use your resources on those over the priorities.
Councilmember Wilsey?
Yeah, so the first comment was mine, and I do agree with listing them in some order of priority based on the resident input. As Councilmember Tizer said, they are all interrelated and they're all equally, they're all vitally important to the community, but I think when we talk about them and list them, presenting them in the order that the community supported them makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you. So, yeah, also I see this totally, all of them important and interrelated. So how can you prioritize when everything is important and everything is interrelated? Just let me give you a simple example to put in perspective. When you sell a bottle of wine where you have packaging, pricing, and the juice inside, what do you prioritize? Oh, I'm going to put a nice packaging and a crappy juice, and very, very expensive. No, you have to prioritize all of them. You have to get all of them in balance and into consideration. So I think here is the same thing. You have to keep all of them in balance, all of them into consideration, because they're all interrelated and they're all important. So give a priority, I don't know if it's the right exercise to prioritize this because they're all important.
So I hear you saying you would not prioritize them. Councilmember Tizer.
So I think I just agreed with Councilmember Zapata that it's not about priority; it's just about the order of the list. And I think citizens have given us that order since none of us so far, I don't know where Councilmember Hall's going yet, have really been that concerned about the order. We can at least hang our hat on the fact that of the people that responded, here's the order they gave us, and we put them in that order.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I was going to throw out that we look at it maybe like tier 1 and tier 2, like we do a SPLOST project. But I do agree that they are all interrelated. It's just that of the respondents, basically the residents said economic vitality and sustainability is the number one focus. That's where we want your energy to go. And I look at those 4, maybe 5 top things, and I feel that that's where we should spend our resources. Not to say that the other items don't support them, like outstanding city services. Those are a support item, and I've always contended that from the beginning, that I feel that's a support item and that's a given, and that's behind all of these. So that's my position.
Okay. Councilmember Palermo.
Yeah, I think doing the tier 1 and tier 2, I think makes a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, although they're related, there's many related aspects, there's many aspects that are not related. And so if we're hearing from residents how important economic development and economic vitality is, as well as hearing the biggest concerns related to development, and then staff is to say, we're actually not going to put our resources, time, or recommendations into economic vitality and improving the development type aspects. We're instead going to have it on this, I don't have the list in front of me, but towards something in the bottom that's more typical, like goal F, goal D, that have that much smaller votes. That's where I see the issue. That by giving the tier 1 and tier 2, we're saying basically, don't choose to put resources on tier 2 over the many important tier 1 stuff.
Mayor.
I've got a problem with the tier 1 and tier 2 because what that sends the message of is we've spent 4 work sessions deciding what our goals are and our objectives. And to then say, well, these aren't so important, but, well, if they're not so important, then we need to get rid of them. But my contention is they're all important. They all need to be there. I don't care really about if we use A's and B's or 1s and 2s. But what I would suggest is we just print them in the report in the order that had most community support to the least. And then let's just call it a day, because here's what's going to happen. Staff is not going to sit around. They get to work in the morning and they say, okay, everybody, get out your strategic plan. Okay, we're going to ignore this today. We're going to focus on this. That's not the way this is going to happen, because there are going to be situations that come up and projects that come up that staff needs to determine whether it's a priority or not. So if we tell them, these are all priorities, but these not so much, I've just got an issue with that, because they're not going to all be looking at all of these in tandem. There are going to be separate projects, separate things that we're doing, and they can reference this document and say, well, yes, it's very important. Like I said, I don't have any problem just printing them out from what the community had as top to the lowest without putting numbers or letters, and that sends a clear message that obviously the one at the top is the one that has, I think, it's subliminal, but I think it does send that message without taking away from any one of those goals.
List them in the order that the community indicated in the reaction survey. Council members, Wilsey, did you have your hand up and then you grabbed it?
Know if we were taking a vote, but I would agree with you. Especially the tier 1. The one thing, if we're looking at it as tier 1 and tier 2 and we break them in half, transportation falls into tier 2, and I don't think anybody wants to see that happen. I think that's just an underlying, core priority for all of the others.
Okay. Councilmember Zapata and then Palermo.
Thank you. So if we all believe here that they're all important, they are all interrelated, so then I will suggest just to use an alphabetical order. If they are all important and they are all interrelated, you just list them by alphabetical order, so then you don't give any idea of any priority over another one if they are all important and interrelated.
That works for me.
Palermo.
And so,
Can we see the list again?
It's packet page 12 in the printout, but that's where, again, we've already witnessed the potential for staff wanting to prioritize on their own and doing it, and putting their priority towards basically one of the bottom 3, versus I don't see it as saying 1 through 5 are more important than 6 through 8. What I see it as timing. So I just see it as, with limited resources, what is staff going to be attacking first? And I see them attacking and being innovative first on 1 through 5. And making sure that that's where the initial resources are going. It doesn't mean 6 through 8 aren't really, really important. It just means where we're really making sure to be innovative, to be, breaking ground on some important new ideas and processes and things like that, is just 1 through 5 is where I feel that initial effort needs to go.
Yes, Councilmember Thompson.
I think the public gave us some input. My first vote would go to do it in that order.
Yeah.
My second vote would be to do it alphabetical, and let's move on to the rest of our meeting.
Okay. Use the priority order from the community, from the reaction survey. I see a yes, a yes, a yes, a yes. Okay. All right. Great. I think that's what we're doing. Using the priority order from the community, the reaction survey.
To be clear, is in page 12, as was stated.
But to be clear, it's just listing it, not telling staff or directing them that this is a priority order, correct?
Absolutely. I think I said
It
that
is a list.
first time I
Yeah.
spoke was it's just a list.
But but again, we all got an email that said staff, as long as they saw it as their as all being equal, there was a choice to ignore 1 through 5 and put the initial resources on. I believe it was number 7, and so that's what I don't think we should be setting ourselves up for.
There was a comment about rewriting the goals as benefit statements. And as an example, some of the benefit statements would read, Roswell is on the move. Roswell is economically vibrant. Roswell is engaging and collaborative. And there were, but you know, in terms of the responses to the questionnaire, the majority said, no, let's not rewrite the goals. So, and I think I'm seeing people say, no, let's not rewrite the goals as benefit statements. One council member suggesting renaming the key objectives as action items. The name action item would be better suited to be tactics, one commenter said.
I think that's a good idea.
Just want to point out, you're going to have an implementation action plan that accompanies this with action items. And I think it would be very confusing to have action items in the strategic plan when your action items are actually in the implementation action plan. And so it's up to you, obviously, but I think that we've struggled over this language. I think the key objectives say what you need as far as explaining that, and then literally those action items every one of them is going to begin with the verb, and it's going to be actionable or it won't be in there.
Okay, Councilmember Hall, and then Tizer, and then Wilsey.
I think this stemmed from the original draft that labeled these as key objectives, and many of them are perceived to be action items versus objectives. So that's perhaps where some of this commentary is on this slide.
Process goes on pretty much everywhere. You start out with key objectives, and then you make action items. I think we should keep to the process that this goes through, that people understand. These are key objectives, and under them will be action items. Will some of the action items say some of the words that the key objective has? I would hope so, because that's what they're supposed to do. So they're key objectives. Action items will follow.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, I think that some of us had that concern, just separating objectives from either tactics or action items, just because in some of the categories, some of the objectives seemed very lofty and strategic, and it was mixed up with some very tactical items. So, just a thought of a way to separate those. It's certainly not critical to moving the plan forward, but I think that was just kind of a mix that I think Christine and I both kind of had that observation, because there was a mix of very strategic objectives and tactical items mixed together.
You're right. You are absolutely right. And if we were going to edit this, some of these would just literally come off and go into, they would be part of the key objectives,
Correct.
but not all of them. And so
Correct.
rather than take that painstaking time,
Right.
we figured it's better to leave it because they were important, and you will see them again literally as action. Some of these are absolutely action items, and you'll see them in the implementation action plan exactly that way. And others where they're bigger, you'll have more action items that then will be able to help achieve them. So you're right, it is a mixed bag, there's no question, but taking something off that's really important to somebody doesn't go well with elected officials, and we know that. So it's better to leave it in and then repeat it than take it out and have somebody, feel like they weren't listened to.
Okay, should we move on? Okay. Okay, so this is a little bit of the same conversation again. One council member added a new strategic objectives, which were defined by resident input and tactical initiatives. And it was an attachment to the questionnaire. And the question was, do you agree with using the term strategic objectives? And we just had that conversation. The voting was not conclusive, but I think the consensus here is that we keep from what I heard, the term key objectives rather than strategic objectives. And then the other question was, do you agree with adding tactical initiatives to the strategic plan? Essentially adding actions to the strategic plan. And we know that, as Amy Paula said, and we said it in the questionnaire, there will be an implementation action plan. Comments? Discussion? Yes, Councilmember Tyser.
I think that's right. Thank you.
So do we move to the next item? Okay. This has to do with those strategic objectives and tactical initiatives that the suggested kind of rewording and reordering, and we asked the question, did it address the community values? And from the 2019 summit, and most people thought it did. Council members suggested numbering the key objectives, and we've already addressed how we're going to list them. And so we can either list them by number or we can list them by letter. I don't know that there's any need to have a discussion, but if you'd like to. And then another comment, one council member suggesting changing some of the photos to better reflect the diversity of the population here in Roswell. And everyone said, yes, we should do that. Are there any comments to that? Any discussion? Okay, I think that means we'll do that better. One council member suggesting changing there's a photo on page 7 of the intersection of Hill and Forest, and there's an agreement to change that photo. And we'll do that. And one council member suggested adding a word cloud. There was not agreement to do that. Is there any conversation about that? Adding a word cloud. No. Okay. That's it, Amy. Do you want to talk about next steps or any additional comments or discussion?
So I know I've been a broken record about next steps but the big piece before we get to the implementation action plan, we do not start the implementation action plan with staff until the strategic plan is adopted by council. So once you adopt the plan, then we will work with Michael and he will work with his team to develop that implementation action plan. And that's really where your concerns about priorities, resources, order of how things will get implemented, that's where that will come into play. We work hard to make sure that things that are not front-loaded, it's a 5-year plan, that there are actually some things that you are planning for in the 5th year. And again, if you can revisit that plan as necessary, but the idea is that that there are some long-term and there are some shorter-term kinds of things that can get done. And those should reflect both your priorities and then the realities of what there is to work with, and also what the other environmental factors are that contribute to this. So we will work with Michael to help get that to you. And that takes a while because he's going to work with not only people in this room, but each of the folks in this room is going to work with their team as well. And hopefully that does a few things. One is it gets more and more and more, I mean, ideally everybody in the organization, to understand what is going to happen, what their role is even in helping bring their vision and bring these goals to fruition. And also that everybody, again, is aligned with what the goals are and what has to be done in order to achieve them. And then, well, what is the priority and how do we get there? And so that will likely come back to you in a work session so that you can see these. And if you say, hey, this shouldn't be in year 5, we've got to do it sooner, then you may hear somebody say, well, we can do it sooner if we get the budget, or these are our constraints and this is why it's in year 5. And you as council will be able to say, well, we need to move that up. So, that's a priority, then let's figure out how we get it done sooner. But basically, this is not your last bite at the apple by any chance, and that's really where, as Maria's pointed out, that there are, the actions and the tactics and getting things done, that's where it's going to really come to a very clear understanding about your priorities and how that fits with what can realistically be done. So once you approve the plan, we will start on that right away. I think, Michael, do you want to talk for a minute about how you see that? Well, first off, I guess the very next step is that we will make the changes that you have suggested. We're going to need some help from Jeff getting some pictures with more diversity and a different intersection. I guess maybe that's not Jeff. I don't know who it is, but we'll make the changes you suggest, and we'll get that back turned around fairly quickly back to you, so that you can bring it for I guess a resolution then to council. Is that right? And then after that, we can do the implementation action plan. Do you want to talk for a minute about that?
No, that sounds accurate. May 24th would be the soonest you would see that if we get everything back in time and get it out to you all for review. Next council meeting would be the 24th. We would do a resolution for adoption at that point. Once that happens, we get down into the working parts, which is the action items and how we meet some of these goals and objectives. And that'll be, that's really the big next step with directors and your folks and how we move forward to make this thing come to reality and be on the ground.
What is the date? Well, we can talk about the logistics. I don't want to overpromise. You need to post probably the whole plan with that agenda.
Yeah,
right?
I need it the week before the 17th at noon. So that's next Monday at noon is when that goes in. So the next council meeting after that is June 14th. It'd have to be in June 7th by noon. So that may be the one that we're looking at.
It may be just because of, I don't know, Jeff, we got to work.
And then we
with
got
the
to
other
have time
folks.
for review also. So
Right.
I think it'd be better if you can get it to us as quick as you can, but it's got to be here by the 7th at noon.
Okay. That's no problem for sure. I think it's pushing it to try to get it still in May.
And then you all would see it on the 14th.
Okay. All right. So that sounds. So I've got to ask the question though. If we make the changes that you all just that people discussed today, and I don't think that I don't think anything is left ambiguous. That's not even the right words, but I don't think anything's ambiguous in terms of what we went through. So if we do that, then is there comfort in this? I know it's high level goals and what you've got. Is there a comfort level in getting that to yes? And and if there isn't, what do we need to do to get to yes? Because you spend a lot of time and money, and also the public has an expectation, right? That this is that something's going to happen, and it doesn't mean every single thing is perfect. Because if we do that, perfect is the enemy of the good is the enemy of the perfect. So, are we okay? Yes? No? You're not okay?
No, I think I need to think about it a lot more. But again, I'm really concerned that this is going to direct where staff resources are going, and ultimately I do feel there's a number of goals that are more urgent for improving the lives and the quality of life for residents. So I need to think about that a little more. I definitely can't commit at the moment.
Well, I do want to just emphasize that when it comes to resources, I mean, this is not a resource document. The implementation action plan will be your document that says resources and when resources will be expended, and even which key objectives are likely, to be first in the next, year 1, year 2, year 3, or 4, year 5. So this document will not tell you about resources. So, well, Matt.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We've been through how many work sessions staff has put in. A lot of time. Citizens have been to many events, online input. We as a council have worked through this today, I believe, in a very cooperative way. Some give up some give up others to create a document that will be living, breathing, and help us move the city along in a strategic direction. And so I'm 100% support of this, looking forward to passing it, and for the first time in the city's history, because I think it's very important for not only accreditation purposes and other purposes that we have this for our citizens, staff, and the overall well-being of the city of Roswell.
Great. That's good to hear. Other comments? Please.
Thank you everybody for your time today and the other 3 work session. So like I said at the beginning, I see this full of obvious goals, objectives, and values. There's nothing about implementation and execution. Cost a lot of money, $200,000 more or less, I believe. Took 4 work sessions of 6 hours each of them. And it still seems to me that it's a make you feel good exercise. And people want more than that. They want to see action and what's going on. Make you feel good. They don't fall for this anymore, at least here in Roswell. So I think that until I don't see more clear execution and implementation of all these obvious goals that we state today and in previous meetings, I don't know if I can support this or not at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I for one am very proud of the work that we did here today. I appreciate you all being here, and I think we started having some very tough conversations, and I think we, made some compromises and came together and kind of realized that we're not all as far apart as you might imagine. So, I'm excited about the opportunity of having a strategic plan and some guidance for us going forward, and I think we can take this, and it's up to us, to staff and the community, to take it to the next steps with the action items. So I think you have to crawl before we can walk and then run. So I think I know it's taken a while and it hasn't been easy, but I think we did make some progress today and started having those really important conversations. So look forward to next steps.
So I've been reminded by many of the people who participated in various phases of this project, and there were literally, I think nearly 2,000 or so people who participated in parts of this. We owe it to them to take their feedback, to take the work that was done by our staff, to take the work that was done by all of us, bring it forward, pass it, and get on to our next step, which is the details around how you implement the concepts in the strategic plan. And so, I want to thank you folks from Management Partners for coming down one more time. I think it was very fruitful for you to be here, and thank you for that. And now it's time to get rolling. It's time to get moving. It's time to help bring the city forward using information and the comments and the thoughts of all those people who contributed. And so, again, thank you guys for your work.
Very welcome. Christine, would you like to say something?
I would just like to thank all of the city staff for all their hard work and management partners and my colleagues as well. I think this has been a kind of an uphill battle, just because perhaps it's my opinion that maybe initially it had some rough beginnings or beginnings that I didn't necessarily agree with. I felt that it started more from a staff perspective, and not that that's bad. Staff have operational plans, but when the strategic plan came to be, I think it should have come from the residents' perspective first, meaning from the council and mayor that represent the residents. And although you interviewed each one of us council members individually as part of that, it started with staff meetings as to what staff could help draft a strategic plan. And I think that made it a little bit challenging for us to get through some of the things. And this has been all great discussion. So there's a lot to digest, and I think I feel that I commented quite a bit in after the initial draft, and I'm appreciative that those comments, some of them were adopted and some not. So that's just how I feel.
Thank you. Mayor, do you want to then bring it home?
Sure. First, I'd like to thank you all for being here. This I think, has been a great exercise. I would like to thank management partners. On a high level, just as an aside, I have asked Amy to work with Michael Fisher to come up with the plan on the next steps that we can post on the website. We can share it on Facebook. We can do whatever we want to with it. That lets the public know there is a clear direction here. These are the next steps. And then the other thing too is when the next step is implementation and execution. So I realize that we've got some eager council members that want to implement and execute today. That is the next step. And I think that will lead to fruitful discussion as well. I would not characterize these work sessions as battles. I think that has a very negative tone. I did not feel like I was battling anyone. And I believe that the discussion did start with us. We had very intense discussions at a council level. And if you notice during these work sessions, the council has always had the first opportunity to speak and influence. Staff has been here to talk with us when we've asked them, give their opinions when we ask them, when we ask for information. They are here to do that. And, I would like to say that what we've done here today, this strategic plan, how many of you remember back in high school when you had to write a paper and the teacher required that you do an outline first? So, or I know that we've got some authors on staff, you map out a book before you actually write in the chapters of what's going on. So the next part of this, in my opinion, is that we need to get to the implementation and execution. Now, what I firmly believe, and another reason why staff is in this room, they have been listening to what the electeds have been saying. And they are clear, whether or not it's written on this sheet of paper, I think they have a clear idea where we're going, where we're not going, because there are divisions among the electeds. And once they do a first draft of implementation and execution, it comes back to the elected officials. And that's where we can say, this is great, you did this well, you really missed the mark on this one. So I think that is a really important part of the step. But also, it's been clear to me throughout this process is that there are many misconceptions on what a strategic plan is and how we roll it out and how we author it. So I think that that's really, really important that we share that information with the public as well. So I feel very confident that we can adopt the strategic plan knowing that this is the first phase of this plan. And if we choose to do nothing, then to me that would be a travesty, because then we have wasted $200,000 and we have wasted a lot of our time. So, but I don't see that that's a necessity here. I really don't see that we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think that this is a good start, and I really honestly believe that we can, when the day is done and all phases are finished, I firmly believe that this council can come together and agree on it and pass the final document. So I encourage you all to be open-minded about it. I'm moving ahead with it. I'm very excited about having a strategic plan. And as Councilmember Judy pointed out, there are some necessities involved in this. But, you know, I've got to tell you that in my conversations with folks and other mayors, they just look at me dumbfounded. The city of Roswell? Really? Doesn't have a strategic plan? You're not serious. So, you know, this is something other communities have been able to do. So I do not want to be in a position to say to anybody that Roswell can't step up to the plate and do it better. So thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon, and thanks again for being with us.